71. The beginning of Hawk's vengeance bonus. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. From now on. Longer chapter every day, almost twice as long. It takes a lot of time and effort to bring both this quality and quantity, so your support means a lot. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. Hawk. Anya. What the hell was this about? Bruce Banner and Natasha Romanoff exchanged a look of pure confusion. Hawk's gaze on Bruce Banner grew calmer, his tone becoming completely devoid of emotion. September 10, 2009. Manhattan. That day, my sister and I were leaving Times Square after a day out. The abomination appeared, and then the Hulk showed up. The two monsters started fighting, and the entire block descended into chaos. In the fallout from their battle, countless innocent people were killed. Including my sister. When the Hulk smashed the abomination into the side of a skyscraper, the falling debris, it struck my sister. Quote. As Hawk spoke, his voice calm and almost hollow, the initial confusion on Bruce and Natasha's faces slowly gave way to a dawning, grim understanding. Right. A victim's family had come to collect. Natasha thought to herself, her eyes instinctively flicking toward Bruce Banner. A look of profound guilt washed over Bruce's face. He looked at Hawk, who was watching him with that same unnervingly calm expression, and opened his mouth. I am so sorry for the loss of your sister. Hawk just snorted. Just as he was about to speak, Natasha cut in, her brow furrowed. Hawk, we sympathize with what happened to your sister, but that wasn't Bruce Banner's fault. It was the abomination's. Dr. Banner was the one who stopped him. Hawk's gaze shifted to Natasha. His voice was hauntingly quiet. Are you saying my sister's death was just collateral damage? What? Natasha was taken aback for a second before shaking her head. It was a terrible tragedy. No one wanted to see that happen. Your sister's death was a horrible accident. Quote. Hawk's face was completely expressionless. I will deal with the abomination. But my sister died because of the Hulk. If the Hulk hadn't thrown the abomination, the debris wouldn't have fallen, and my sister wouldn't have been killed on the spot. Listening to his tone shift from calm to ice-cold, Natasha felt a prickle of unease. Bruce, however, was overcome with guilt and spoke to Hawk again. I am so sorry for your sister's death. Truly. If there was any way I could make it up to you, I would. He wasn't a bad person. He never had been. If he were, his first reaction after becoming the Hulk wouldn't have been to run. Just look at the abomination, the moment he transformed, he went full Homelander. So, his guilt was real. And his desire to make amends was genuine. Hearing Bruce Banner's words, Hawk laughed. He looked at Bruce, a brilliant, chilling smile spreading across his face. Make it up to me. You'll get your chance. Hand over the Hulk. What? A life for a life. The Hulk killed my sister. So I'll take the Hulk's life in return. Quote. Bruce Banner froze. Natasha was floored. Her expression shifted as she stared at Hawk, a sense of dread creeping in. Is this kid a lunatic? Natasha thought, shaking her head with a weary sigh. She took Bruce by the arm and started pulling him toward their sports car. We're leaving. Boom. The car, parked a short distance away, suddenly imploded. An invisible palm print appeared, pressing down on the frame from above. Instantly, the sports car crumpled under the immense pressure. Crack. Natasha instinctively drew the weapon holstered at the small of her back, chambering around as she aimed it at Hawk, the man she had just dismissed as a lunatic. Hawk narrowed his eyes, watching her level the gun at him. My score is with the one responsible. The Hulk killed my sister. Are you planning on harboring a criminal? Agent Natasha Romanoff of S.H.I.E.L.D. Quote. Natasha's eyes widened, her pupils contracting as she stared at the man who had just stated her name and affiliation with perfect accuracy. Who are you? Hawk ignored her, his gaze shifting to Bruce Banner, whom Natasha had instinctively shielded behind her. Natasha's voice was low and steady. And for the record, Dr. Bruce Banner is not a criminal. He was granted a full presidential pardon. A pardon. From the president. A derisive smile touched Hawk's lips as he looked at Natasha. A presidential pardon. What the hell does that have to do with me? I'm the victim's family. Did you ever hear me say I was dropping the charges? Hearing his words, Natasha's expression became intensely wary. Just then, Natasha. Bruce Banner, who had been shielded behind her, stepped forward. He gently pushed down the barrel of her gun and looked at Hawk, who had come for justice, his lips pressed into a thin line. Listen, kid. I'm truly sorry for your sister's death. But the Hulk did that, not me. I'm a victim of the Hulk, too. Believe me, if there's anyone in this world who wants the Hulk dead, no one wants it more than I do. And that was the truth. At least, for now, that's exactly how he felt. He was the Hulk's first victim. Because of the Hulk, he'd lost his job with the military. Because of the Hulk, he'd lost his mansion in Quantico and his girlfriend whose father was a general. And because of the Hulk, he'd been forced to flee the land of the free and hide out in India. Standing before Natasha, Bruce Banner looked at the young man who had come to hold him accountable, his voice sincere and filled with emotion. Hawk just laughed. Dr. Banner, I know you are you, and the Hulk is the Hulk. That's why I haven't laid a hand on you. As I said, I'm here to settle a score with the one responsible. So, I'll say it one last time. Let the Hulk out. This is between me and him. I can't. Bruce Banner shook his head, his expression grim. Kid, I can't do that. If the Hulk comes out, I can't control him. Hearing this, Hawk looked down and sighed. When he looked back up at Bruce Banner, the calm in his eyes had been completely replaced by a coldness as deep and unforgiving as a glacier. The next second, boom, Hawk's figure vanished. In the same instant, Bruce Banner was sent flying backward, crashing like a meteor into the vacation cabin behind him. Natasha stared in shock at Hawk, who now stood where Bruce had been just a moment ago. Shish. Bomb. Hawk drove his boot straight into her stomach, sending her flying 5 meters back. His voice was ice cold. This is between me and the Hulk. If S.H.I.E.L.D. gets involved, I have no problem turning the entire organization into collateral damage. Natasha, who had crashed hard to the ground, stared back at him in utter disbelief. Just then, a low growl echoed from the cabin, which now had a massive, man-sized hole in its wall. Peering through the hole, a vague silhouette could be seen struggling in the wreckage, its guttural roars sounding as if it were desperately trying to cage something within itself. Anya, I'll have your revenge soon. Hawk stood outside, stone-faced. He took a deep breath, bringing his body and mind to their absolute peak in an instant. At the same time, the figure in the ruins of the cabin let out a final, agonized roar that grew louder and louder. It was clear. Bruce Banner could no longer contain the Hulk. With the sound of tearing fabric, the once struggling cabin fell completely silent. The next second, a massive green silhouette filled Hawk's vision. Hulk. The colossal, green-skinned Hulk, sporting his signature bowl cut, leapt from the hole in the cabin. With a roar announcing his arrival, he brought his fists together into a massive hammer and swung down at Hawk, who looked like nothing more than an ant in comparison. Hawk looked up. The moment his right hand clenched into a fist, the ground beneath his feet fractured. He met the Hulk's mountain-sized fists, driving his own right fist upward to meet the blow. The Hulk's massive fist and Hawk's small one collided. Instantly, the world went silent, as if it had entered a realm of absolute quiet. And then, the sound barrier shattered. A shockwave of pure, kinetic energy exploded from the point of impact, a ring of destruction that tore through the landscape. Boom. The ground beneath Hawk's feet shattered, spider webbing cracks spreading out in all directions. Crash. The Hulk, who had used the momentum of his jump to try and smash Hawk into a pulp, was sent flying backward. His massive, hill-like body once again crashed through the vacation cabin, disappearing into the wreckage. Boom. The shockwave from their collision tore outwards like a hurricane, ripping through everything in its path. The vacation cabin, being the closest, took the full force of the blast. The wooden structure offered no resistance. In the blink of an eye, the front porch was ripped from its foundation, followed by the door, the beds, and even the walls. Natasha met the same fate. The hurricane blast reached her 5 meters away. Just as she managed to get to her feet, the force of the shockwave slammed into her. Her face visibly distorted under the pressure, and then her entire body was lifted off the ground once more. Bomb! She was thrown through the air in a perfect arc before crashing onto the roof of a yellow Corolla. The moment she slammed onto the roof, the car's 4 side windows and both the front and rear windshields shattered simultaneously. The roof caved in like a tin can. Gwen, who had been hiding under her car on Hawk's instruction, stared wide-eyed at the crumpled remains of the Corolla her father, George, had given her for her 16th birthday. And at the unconscious woman who was now sleeping on top of it. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. #bonus chapter every 300 ps. If you like the story, please leave a review. #add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators' thoughts. 21 comments, 0 vote. 72. The end of Hawk's revenge. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. The once beautiful, exquisitely crafted cabin on the shore of Culver Lake had, in the blink of an eye, been utterly obliterated by the shockwave, reduced to nothing more than a pile of splintered wood. The ground beneath Hawk's feet was a web of deep fissures. A low growl echoed from the ruins, growing louder, closer. Until, boom, a massive, pure green form erupted from the wreckage like a cannonball, blasting aside the debris that buried it and stomping back into view. The next second, the Hulk roared, the ground shattering with every step as he charged like a colossal, raging bull. Hawk didn't hesitate. He dug his heels in, the cracked earth beneath him turning to dust as he launched himself forward, becoming a streak of light in the afternoon sun, rocketing to meet the Hulk's charge. Hulk. Roar. Crack. Bam. Bam. Within his cosmo, the flames of battle burned brighter. Hawk, now a living cannonball, slammed into the Hulk's massive chest. His momentum didn't slow, he drove the green behemoth backward, sending him crashing through the treeline at the edge of the lake. One after another, thick, ancient trees snapped like twigs under the Hulk's immense weight. As he was driven back, the Hulk roared in fury, hammering his fists against Hawk's back again and again. A flush of red colored Hawk's cheeks, but the light of his cosmo only grew more brilliant. There was no technique here. No fancy martial arts. As Hawk drove the Hulk toward the waters of Culver Lake, he simply endured the bone-shattering blows to his back while his own right fist became a blur, slamming repeatedly into the Hulk's side. The Hulk's eyes burned with rage. Hawk's eyes grew colder than ice. Crash. Hawk drove them both into Culver Lake. Their bodies shattered the frozen surface, sending twin geysers of water into the air. The moment they hit the water, Hawk used his smaller frame to his advantage, planting his feet firmly on the Hulk's massive chest. Even as they plunged into the icy depths, his eyes remained cold, his fists relentlessly pounding the green giant beneath him. He had chosen his battlefield during his reconnaissance trips. Culver Lake. Or more specifically, the bottom of Culver Lake. After awakening his cosmo, Hawk had gained complete mastery over his senses. He could fight underwater as easily as he could on land, his cosmo sustaining him without the need for air. The Hulk, however, could not. As strong as he was, he still needed to breathe. He had been knocked unconscious by a lack of oxygen at high altitudes before, and even during his final battle with Thanos, he'd had to surface for air. And so, Culver Lake was the grave Hawk had chosen for him. But the Hulk clearly wasn't ready to be buried. With a single, massive swat, the Hulk sent Hawk flying, then immediately began clawing his way toward the surface. But Hawk was just as agile in the water as he was on land. He righted himself, and with a surge of power that sent a shockwave through the water, he instantly reappeared beneath the Hulk, grabbing his massive leg and dragging him back down into the depths. The entire lake began to boil. Geyser after geyser erupted from the surface as the layer of ice continued to shatter. Gwen, who had witnessed the entire spectacle, was completely stunned. When she finally snapped out of it, she ran to the edge of the lake, peering into the churning water. The Hulk, with his massive size and green skin, was easy to spot. Hawk was not. Gwen strained her eyes, watching the Hulk thrashing below the surface, his limbs flailing as if fighting something unseen. A wave of relief washed over her. If Hawk were losing, the Hulk would have already surfaced. The fact that he hadn't, that he was still on the defensive, could only mean that Hawk had the upper hand. Just as she was processing this, she heard footsteps behind her. Gwen snapped back to reality, an idea striking her as she spun around. She saw her. The woman in the black jumpsuit, the one who had been sleeping on the roof of her car, was now awake, walking toward her with a pale, unsteady gait. Natasha's gaze was fixed on the lake, where geysers were still erupting from the epic battle below. As she tried to locate the Hulk in the murky depths, she reached into her pocket, pulling out a communicator to contact her headquarters. As for Gwen, since she hadn't appeared with Hawk, Natasha simply assumed she was an innocent bystander. And then, thwack! Just as she was about to dial, Natasha froze. She subconsciously reached for the back of her head, then turned around. She saw her. Gwen, holding a thick tree branch she must have picked up from somewhere, stared back at her. Her eyes were a complex mix, 30% nervousness, 30% apology, 30% determination, and 10% worry. What's with the weird look? The thought flashed through Natasha's mind. Then, her eyes rolled back in her head, the communicator slipped from her grasp, and she collapsed. And just like that, the Black Widow, Natasha Romanoff, a top agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., was taken down by a single blow from a high school girl who wouldn't even be 18 for a few more days. No one would ever believe it. Gwen gasped as Natasha crumpled, quickly dropping the branch and catching the unconscious agent before she hit the ground. She looked at Natasha's limp form, her lips pressed together. After a moment's thought, she wrapped her arms around the agent's waist and began to slowly, painstakingly drag her away from the battle. Gwen's actions had been pure instinct. She'd seen Natasha with Bruce Banner, they were obviously on the same side. And it was clear Natasha had been about to call for backup. She couldn't let that happen. Hawk was here for his sister's revenge. It was his right. So, Gwen had acted. But she hadn't wanted to hurt Natasha. And if she left her here, the fight between Hawk and the Hulk could easily harm her while she was unconscious. So, Gwen decided to pull her from the battlefield. This was a war between Hawk and the Hulk. Hawk wasn't using any dirty tricks, and he hadn't hurt any innocents. So the Hulk couldn't either. Onionon. That was the only way it would be fair. Beneath the surface. With a final, massive splash, the Hulk's body hit the bottom of the lake, carving two deep trenches in the mud as he slid to a halt. Never let a wounded enemy escape. Press the advantage. Bomb. Hawk, who had come for the Hulk's life, shot forward, a powerful surge of water blasting behind him. He appeared before the Hulk in an instant, his right fist driving forward. In an instant, the Hulk's body arched in agony, the very lakebed beneath him cracking and collapsing. A cloud of mud and silt erupted, momentarily obscuring Hawk's vision. The next second, the lakebed began to churn, as if a giant earthworm were burrowing through it. In the blink of an eye, the disturbance had moved 30 feet away. Trying to run. You think you can escape? Hawk sneered. He watched the rapidly moving disturbance in the lakebed and shot after it, his right fist ready to strike again. The Hulk burst from the mud, his eyes wide with rage. He roared, taking the full force of Hawk's punch with his chest. He was sent flying backward again, but as he flew, he threw something he had dragged from the lakebed at Hawk. It was a small motorboat, covered in moss, that had clearly been sleeping at the bottom of the lake for years. Hawk saw the boat hurtling toward him but didn't dodge. He met it head-on. Crash. Hawk's momentum was broken for a split second. The motorboat shattered, the two halves flying past him and continuing on their trajectory. But that single moment was all the Hulk needed. Bomb. The surface of Culver Lake erupted in a spray of boiling water. A green head burst through, and the Hulk began to greedily suck in fresh air. Gwen, who had just dragged Natasha to a safe distance, was panting with exertion. She looked back at the lake just in time to see the green head emerge and let out a startled gasp. Just then, the Hulk, now halfway out of the water, seemed to remember something. He froze in midair and looked down, roaring at the surface below. Hawk, who had caught the Hulk's right leg at the last possible second, smiled coldly. With a massive burst from his Cosmo, he put all his strength into it, dragging the Hulk, who had been so close to freedom, back down into the icy depths of Culver Lake. Dragged back into the water, the Hulk saw the surface just out of his reach. He spread his arms and legs, trying to claw his way back up. But it was too late. Boom. The Hulk's back slammed into the lakebed once more. He was about to try the same escape maneuver again, but Hawk was already on him, driving a fist into his chest and sending him sprawling before he could even start to burrow. Don't you know? The same move never works on a saint twice. Die. Hulk. Roar. Sonic fist. Bam, 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 bam. Beneath the surface, the water churned violently. Above the surface, geysers shot into the sky. One after another, massive pillars of water erupted from the lake, accompanied by thunderous booms from below. Gwen, who had run back to the shore, could only stare, completely dumbfounded by the sight. But soon, with a final, deep thud from below, the last geyser fell, and the roiling lake became calm, its surface returning to a glassy stillness as if nothing had ever happened. By the time Gwen realized what had occurred, Culver Lake was as peaceful as it had ever been. The fight is over. Who won? Gwen's eyes were wide, unblinking as she stared at the surface of the lake, her heart pounding with anticipation, terrified that the next thing she saw wouldn't be the outcome she was hoping for. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. Hash bonus chapter every 300 PS. Hash if you like the story, please leave a review. Hash add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators' thoughts. 2 comments 0 vote. 73 The death of the Hulk and the survival of Banner bonus. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. The surface of Culver Lake was once again calm and still. It was the same below the surface. The murky water washed over Hawk's body. His gaze was fixed on the massive green form lying motionless in the silt of the lakebed, his expression unreadable. The Hulk. Yes. He was dead. The cause of death was simple, exactly as Hawk had planned. He had been trapped underwater and drowned. But, simple, was a relative term. Hawk glanced inward at the state of his cosmo. It was in chaos. Even the star chart of the Phoenix, which illuminated his inner universe, was now dim and lifeless. It couldn't be helped. The Hulk was incredibly strong. A normal person drowning will fight with unimaginable strength, to say nothing of a creature who gets stronger the angrier he gets. The Hulk's final, desperate struggle had almost been enough to force Hawk into his own Phoenix state, to be reborn from the ashes. But, he had won. Hawk thought to himself, his eyes still on the Hulk's corpse resting silently on the lakebed. Just then, wisps of green light began to rise from the Hulk's massive body. In a flash, they shot forward, merging with Hawk. VMMMM. Hawk felt his cosmo begin to spin on its own, drawing the green light into his inner universe. As the light flowed into him, his shattered cosmo was revitalized, bursting with a new, vibrant life. Is this gamma energy? Hawk's brow furrowed as he looked down at the Hulk. As the last of its power was absorbed by his cosmo, the massive body began to shrink. The green glow of its skin faded until, with the final wisp of energy gone, the colossal form of the Hulk vanished completely. In its place lay the still, lifeless body of Bruce Banner. Hawk stared at the man who had appeared, his eyes glinting. On the shore of Culver Lake. Gwen was still staring at the calm surface of the water, her eyes wide, her breath held. Just then, boom, the lake's surface exploded. Gwen's pupils contracted. The next second, she saw Hawk burst from the water, and a wave of pure relief washed over her. The tension in her face melted away, replaced by a radiant smile. Gwen ran toward him as he landed on the shore, still carrying the body of Bruce Banner. Hawk. Thump. The t-shirt he'd been wearing was long since shredded, and his pants were in tatters. Hawk tossed Bruce Banner's body aside and turned to Gwen, who was running toward him, her tear-streaked face now beaming. A faint smile touched his own lips. Suddenly, Hawk collapsed. Holy shit. Hawk. Gwen froze for a split second, then sprinted forward, catching him just before he hit the ground. Her voice trembled. What's wrong? Hawk's head rested on her shoulder. I'm fine. Liar. Gwen was on the verge of tears, looking at his deathly pale face. Hawk shook his head. It's nothing. Just, exhausted. Really? Yeah. Hawk nodded. His battle with the Hulk, burning his cosmo to its limits, had left him utterly drained. He'd been fine in the lake, still running on adrenaline, but the moment he'd hit the shore, the fight was over. An endless wave of weakness and exhaustion washed over him. But his cosmo, now infused with gamma energy, was already beginning to recover. The dim Phoenix star chart was slowly brightening, and its powerful healing ability was already working to dispel the feeling of weakness. It wasn't fast enough to restore him to his peak in the blink of an eye. In the span of a single breath, color began to return to his pale face. Seeing the life return to his cheeks, Gwen finally believed him. She let out a sigh of relief, then seemed to remember something. Still supporting him, she looked over at the man lying on the ground. Probably because of the Hulk transformation, Banner was wearing a pair of ridiculously oversized shorts, sparing him the embarrassment of his usual post-Hulk nudity. Gwen looked at the half-naked man, clad only in his giant shorts, then glanced back at Hawk, who was still leaning on her shoulder. He's not dead. No. Then the Hulk. The Hulk is dead. Hawk's voice was firm. He looked at the unmoving body of Bruce Banner on the ground. But he's not. After all, the Hulk was the Hulk, and Bruce Banner was Bruce Banner. Hawk had been just as surprised when Banner had reappeared after the Hulk died. Hawk let out a soft chuckle, inhaling the scent of Gwen's hair. His voice was weak. The one who killed my sister was the Hulk, not Bruce Banner. It was the same principle he had started with. If Bruce Banner had been the one responsible for his sister's death, he wouldn't have wasted time with words. He would have turned him into paste with a single punch. Every injustice has a perpetrator, every debt has a creditor. The Hulk was dead. His feud with Bruce Banner was over. That was why he had brought him back to the surface. So he just passed out from choking on water. He'll probably wake up in a little while. Quote. Okay. Let's go home, Hawk said, looking up at the sky. If we leave now, we should be able to get you home before your curfew. Gwen raised an eyebrow, then seemed to remember something and shook her head. I don't think that's going to happen. Why not? Our car got smashed. Quote. Supported by Gwen, Hawk looked over and saw it. Her yellow Corolla, which had been parked a safe distance away, was now a complete wreck. He also saw Natasha Romanoff, lying on the grass nearby, sleeping as peacefully as a baby. Gwen followed his gaze and, with an innocent tone, quickly explained. I didn't want to knock her out. But I saw her pull out her phone, and I thought she was calling for backup, so I hit her with a stick. Ah. Hawk looked at Gwen's innocent face and her even more innocent tone. He thought for a moment, decided against telling her who Natasha was, and said instead, do you have your phone? Gwen pulled it from her pocket. Yeah. 1646. With one hand supporting a weakened Hawk, Gwen took out her phone and dialed the number he gave her. The call connected quickly. Anna's voice came through the line. This is in. Get a car over here. Quote. There was a moment of silence on the other end, then Anna's voice returned, sharp and efficient. One moment, Hawk. 3 minutes later. A black Chevy SUV appeared at the end of the small access road, pulling up in front of Hawk and Gwen. A man in a black suit got out. Mr. Hawk. Keys. Hawk cut him off. The man paused, then took a set of car keys from his pocket and handed them over. Hawk took the keys and gave them directly to Gwen. With her supporting him, they slowly made their way to the SUV. As Gwen helped him open the passenger door, just before he got in, Hawk seemed to remember something. He looked back at the man in the black suit, who now stood with his hands crossed in front of him, his posture perfectly professional. By the way. The man in black looked up. Sir. Natasha and Bruce can die, but not today. Quote. Understood, sir. The man paused for a second, then nodded, his voice a low rumble. Hawk said nothing more. With Gwen's help, he sat down in the passenger seat, leaning back against the headrest. Gwen closed the door, then walked around to the driver's side. As she passed the man in the black suit, she paused. Thanks for the car. The man in black replied quickly, you're welcome. It is our pleasure to be of service. Gwen blinked at his almost panicked expression, then just smiled, thanked him again, and got into the driver's seat. Hawk, you could have been a little nicer. The man brought us a car. All right. Hawk, leaning back and feeling the unprecedented soreness that came with his body's accelerated healing, turned to Gwen with a smirk. You want me to get out and kiss his feet? Gwen just rolled her eyes at him. She started the engine, turned the SUV around, and headed back toward New York City. By the way, my car is still back there. When they wake up, are they going to be able to find us? My business with the Hulk is finished. If they want to start something new, I don't mind. That woman in the jumpsuit, I think she's that. Gwen. Yeah. Can you let me rest for a bit? I'm really tired. Quote. Okay. The man in black stood with his hands crossed, watching the SUV drive away. He then pulled out his phone, made a call, and reported that Hawk and Gwen had left, repeating Gwen's final words of thanks. The voice on the other end was silent for a moment. A few seconds later. Return. Our relationship with him is very good right now. Maintain it. Yes, sir. And the car they left behind. Don't touch it. Since he gave no instructions, it means he either doesn't care, or he has other plans. Do not interfere. Understood. Quote. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. 74. The Director and Commander of S.H.I.E.L.D. bonus. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. The sun began to set. Culver Lake was quiet. A gentle breeze rippled across the water and swept over the shore, waking the unconscious Natasha from her slumber on the grass. Natasha's eyes fluttered open, and she stared absently at the orange sun hanging low in the sky. The next second, her pupils focused, and she leapt to her feet, instantly dropping into her classic combat stance. But the shore was empty. There was no one around, save for the yellow Corolla with its Cavetan roof, and Bruce Banner, who was lying motionless in front of the ruined cabin, his condition unknown. Wait. Bruce. Natasha snapped back to reality. She ran to Bruce's side. He was soaking wet, wearing only a pair of remarkably durable shorts, lying on the fractured ground. She checked his vitals and found a faint pulse. Without hesitation, she pulled a syringe from her pocket and plunged it directly into his chest. The effect was instantaneous. The moment Natasha pulled the needle out, Bruce's eyes shot open. The next second, Bruce Banner shot upright, terror written all over his face as he gasped for air. Watching him come back to life, Natasha let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. After a few moments, Bruce's breathing steadied, and the look of terror on his face began to subside. Natasha helped him to the shore and sat him down against the trunk of a large tree that had been snapped in two. Once he was settled, she finally asked her question. What happened? Quote. Bruce didn't answer. His brow was furrowed in concentration, as if he were trying to piece together a fragmented memory. Natasha didn't press him. While she waited, she subconsciously reached up and touched the back of her head, her own memory returning. She could still see the eyes of the girl who had knocked her out. After all, it wasn't every day you saw a perfectly screwed up expression. Who was she? Natasha wondered. Just then, Bruce looked down at his own arms. He squeezed his biceps, a look of dawning realization on his face. He looked up at Natasha, his voice low and heavy. The Hulk is dead. Natasha snapped out of her thoughts, her eyes widening as she stared at Bruce, as if she hadn't heard him correctly, or couldn't bring herself to believe it. After all, this was the Hulk they were talking about. The Hulk is dead, Bruce Banner repeated, the fragmented memories replaying in his mind. He dragged the Hulk to the bottom of the lake. The Hulk couldn't get away from him, he was completely overpowered. It was like he didn't even need to breathe, he just killed the Hulk down there. But, he didn't kill me. His tone was strange, his feelings toward the Hulk's killer were impossible to pin down. Was it hatred? Not really. No one on Earth hated the Hulk more than he did. Though they had reached a sort of truce after the Battle of New York, allowing him to control his transformations, it didn't mean he had ever truly accepted the Hulk. If given the choice, he would still have chosen a life without the Hulk. The Hulk had destroyed everything he'd ever had. It had cost him the woman he loved, forced him into hiding in the most desolate corners of the world. And now, his greatest wish had been granted. Someone had finally killed the monster for him. From that perspective, how could he feel hatred? He should be grateful. And yet, gratitude. Bruce Banner frowned. That wasn't quite right either. He couldn't put a name to what he was feeling. But one thing was certain. The Hulk is dead. The kid named Hawk killed him. I'm sure of it. Bruce took a deep breath, clenching his fists under Natasha's watchful gaze. He no longer felt that familiar surge of power that always preceded a transformation. He felt a sense of loss. As if a part of him was missing. Natasha listened to his confirmation, falling into a thoughtful silence. Just then, the sharp ring of a phone cut through the quiet. Natasha blinked, then realized it was hers. She quickly followed the sound and found it lying in the grass. It was her phone. Natasha picked it from the ground, saw the caller ID, took a steadying breath, and answered. Director. Natasha. At the Shield. Triskelion headquarters, Nick Fury, instantly recognizable in his black trench coat and eye patch, stood in the command center, his hands on his hips. He spoke the moment he heard her voice. What's your ETA for Tennessee? My ETA. Natasha's voice trailed off. She looked at Bruce, at the strange, conflicting emotions warring on his face, relief, loss, even a flicker of anger, and the words caught in her throat. Director, the Hulk has been killed. Quote. Nick Fury's expression froze. His single eye narrowed. Standing next to him, Commander Maria Hill, dressed in her SHIELD tactical uniform, was equally stunned. What do you mean, the Hulk is dead? Is Bruce Banner dead? No. Dr. Banner is alive. But the Hulk is dead. Quote. The Hulk is dead, but Bruce Banner isn't. The words hung in the air, a paradox that left the director and the commander of SHIELD utterly baffled. Nick Fury recovered first, his dark face now etched with a grave seriousness. Report. In detail. Natasha complied, starting from the moment she had picked up Dr. Banner at the airport. She recounted their arrival at the cabin, how they were just about to leave for Tennessee when Hawk had appeared, seeking revenge for his sister. She then detailed the fight, how Hawk, who couldn't have been more than 20, had gone toe-to-toe with the Hulk, dragged him into the lake, and killed him in the depths. She left nothing out, including the part where Gwen had knocked her unconscious. In the command center, Nick Fury and Maria Hill listened to her report, utterly speechless. When Natasha mentioned being taken out by another girl, also under 21, the corner of Maria Hill's mouth twitched. Nick Fury's breath hitched. Unbelievable. A top SHIELD operative, the super spy known as the Black Widow, was taken out by a girl who wasn't even old enough to drink. This had to be a joke. Natasha sensed the stunned silence on the other end. I apologize, Director. It all happened too fast. I didn't have time to properly assess the situation. Thinking back on it now, she realized how careless she had been. Why would a random teenage girl just happen to be there, at that exact moment? But at the time, she had just regained consciousness after the shockwave, her head was still fuzzy, and Gwen had been unarmed. She hadn't seemed like a threat. And the result was a story she'd never live down. The thought of this embarrassing mark on her permanent record sent a wave of melancholy through Natasha. Just then, Maria Hill's voice came over the line. This girl who knocked you out, do you think she was with him? With Hawk? Without a doubt. Natasha's confirmation was instant. Then she frowned, another thought occurring to her. However. Go on, Nick Fury said, his voice low. Natasha relayed what Bruce had told her, that after the Hulk was dead, Hawk could have just left him at the bottom of the lake to drown, but had chosen to save him instead. And her, as well. Natasha then remembered something Hawk had said. My score is with the one responsible. Natasha clarified, from the very beginning, Hawk said he was only there for the Hulk. He was there for revenge. So, that's why he didn't kill Natasha or Bruce Banner. He has principles. Maria Hill thought to herself. But Nick Fury clearly saw it differently. Hey. Standing with his hands on his hips, Nick Fury let out a cold laugh. Natasha, you said he knew your name from the start. And that he knew you were from S.H.I.E.L.D. Natasha was pulled back to the moment. Yes. He's afraid. He doesn't want to make an enemy of us. Quote. Natasha fell silent. Maria Hill looked at Nick Fury, a slight frown on her face. She didn't agree with his assessment. They all knew how powerful the Hulk was. They had dropped him from 30,000 feet in a glass cage, and it hadn't killed him. But this Hawk had. Maria was about to voice her objection, but Nick Fury was already speaking again. This name, Hawk, is that all you have? Any other details? One moment. Natasha blinked, then scanned her surroundings. Her eyes landed on the wrecked Corolla. Director, there's a car here. It looks like it belongs to them. Fury's eye lit up. GW 521. Trace it. Now. Fury barked the order at a nearby agent. The agent nodded and began typing furiously at his keyboard. Bonus chapter at 1500 PS. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. Bonus chapter every 300 PS. If you like the story, please leave a review. Add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators thoughts. 20 comments 0 vote. 75 a director with a rebellious streak bonus. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. As an agency operating under the direct authority of the World Security Council, formed by the 5 global superpowers, S.H.I.E.L.D. possessed immense power. Especially when dealing with nations outside of the Big Five, SHIELD's authority often superseded that of local law enforcement. As for its authority within the 5 superpowers, that was a more complicated story. The moment the agent entered the license plate into the system, a flood of information appeared on the main screen. The plate's registered owner, their driving history. In a matter of seconds, Gwen Stacy's photograph was displayed in perfect clarity for the entire command center to see. Send that to Natasha. Yes, sir. Ping. Natasha's phone chimed. She glanced at the photo that had just come through. It was a picture of Gwen, smiling sweetly. Director, that's her. HMPH. Nick Fury nodded, his expression grim. Run a search on her network. Find anyone by the name of Hawk. The agent began the search before Fury had even finished his sentence. But, Hawk social media accounts, none. Hawk photos online, none. Hawk driver's license, non-existent. Aside from a few text-based records, there was nothing else. Nick Fury's brow furrowed. Wrong person. I don't think so, sir. The agent turned to face Fury. We ran the search through Gwen Stacy's network. There's only one possible connection. Hawk. Male, 17 years old. Like Gwen Stacy, he's a senior at Midtown School of Science and Technology. Based on the social media of other Midtown students, it's suspected that he and Gwen Stacy are dating. Fury's voice was a low growl. And there are no photos of him. Quote. No, sir. The agent, fearing he had been careless, ran the search again before confirming. Director, this Hawk has no online presence. No social media accounts of his own. Logically, at 17, he should have a driver's license, but there are no records for him in the New York DMV system. Well, now. What kind of atypical high school student is this? A slow, cold smile spread across Fury's face. What do we have on Gwen Stacy? Confirmed. Gwen Stacy, born May 21, 1995. Father, George Stacy, Captain, NYPD. The agent began rattling off the details from her file. But he was cut off. Contact the SHIELD Command Center in New York, Fury ordered. Tell them to wait. Just as Fury was about to deploy a team, Maria Hill, who had been standing beside him, finally reacted. She cut him off, turning to face him with a deep frown. Director, what are you doing? Nick Fury looked at her. He needs to be contained. We don't even know who he is. Which is why we're sending a team. No. What? I disagree. Maria Hill met Nick Fury's one good eye, her voice firm. Until we have a clear intelligence profile on this Hawk, I will not authorize such a reckless operation. Is he insane? This was the person who had killed the Hulk. To just go in blind, without any proper intelligence, what was he trying to do? Make an enemy of someone with that kind of power. Hawk may have killed the Hulk, but from Hill's perspective, the situation was still manageable. If Natasha's report was accurate, he had done it for revenge. The fact that he hadn't killed Natasha or Bruce Banner meant he was a man of principle. And principles were a good thing. Principles meant he had lines he wouldn't cross. It meant that even if he wasn't an ally, he was, at the very least, neutral. To charge in now, as Fury was suggesting, was just needlessly looking for trouble. It was practically manufacturing a powerful new enemy. And so, Maria Hill stood firmly against him. We need to investigate first. Then we send an agent to make contact. Contact. Nick Fury's eye glinted. Hill, he killed the Hulk. Our Hulk. That was a direct provocation. On that basis alone, he must be brought under strict control. With that, Nick Fury turned back to the agent. Notify. I said no. Maria Hill's expression was stone cold as she addressed the agents who had stood up and turned to face them. I am the Deputy Director of SHIELD and its acting commander of operations. Without my direct order, all actions targeting this individual, Hawk, are forbidden. The agents exchanged glances, then, as if remembering something, they all responded in unison. Yes, Commander. Maria Hill then turned back to Nick Fury, her expression severe. Don't forget, Director. Your operational authority is still suspended by the Council. Until they lift that suspension, all SHIELD decisions are mine to make. It was true. Nick Fury had been grounded by the World Security Council. The reason was simple. During the Battle of New York, he had defied a direct order. Did he really think he could ignore the will of the five great powers and face no consequences? The decision to launch a nuclear strike on Manhattan during the Battle of New York earlier that year had been a unanimous resolution by the WSC, and the order to execute it had initially been given to SHIELD. And the result? The director himself had led the charge in violating their resolution. He had even personally flown out and shot down one of SHIELD's own jets. Unbelievable. It was blatant insubordination. A treason. So, even though the outcome had been favorable, from the WSC's perspective, Nick Fury was clearly insubordinate to his core. There was a saying, loyalty that isn't absolute is no loyalty at all. The Council's initial decision had been to fire Nick Fury, to make an example of him and show everyone that SHIELD answered to the Council, not the other way around. But someone had pleaded his case. Nick Fury's old friend, Alexander Pierce, was one of the five heads of the Council. After much persuasion, Pierce had managed to convince the other four members to change their minds. In the end, they had decided to suspend all of Nick Fury's operational authority, with Deputy Director and Commander Maria Hill acting in his stead. As for when Fury's suspension would be lifted, that depended on his behavior. And so far, the Council had shown no inclination to reinstate him. So while he was still, technically, the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., he was a figurehead, a mascot. He could observe, he could advise, but he had no authority to make a decision. Hearing Maria Hill's words, Nick Fury remembered his place. His voice was a low growl. This will make us look weak to our enemies. Maria Hill frowned. Just as she was about to respond, a surveillance photo flashed onto the main screen. The agent who had been running the search blinked, then glanced at the source of the information. His eyes lit up, and he turned to Maria Hill. Commander. Go ahead. Maria Hill turned, her eyes drawn to the new photo. Where did you find this? It was just uploaded. New York University published its list of incoming scholarship students for next year. Hawk is one of them. I ran the photo from the announcement through our system. And the location. Quantico. As the agent spoke, his hands flew across the keyboard. With this first photo as a lead, more began to appear. One by one, surveillance images of Hawk from Quantico town were projected onto the main screen. At the same time, Natasha, who had remained silent on the open line during the dispute between her superiors, finally spoke up. Commander, I can confirm his identity. Maria Hill stared at the photo of Hawk wearing a baseball cap, a slight frown on her face. When was this taken? July 5th. Quote. Hearing the date, Maria Hill's frown deepened. She remembered something. If she wasn't mistaken, something major had happened in Quantico on that day. A major security breach. And sure enough, the data confirmed it. The surveillance footage showed Hawk in Quantico town on the day of the lockdown. But after the lockdown began, he had vanished from all cameras. The next time any record of him appeared, he was in Maryland. It was almost certain that the chaos at the Quantico military base was connected to him. Nick Fury, having received this new intelligence, turned to Maria Hill. A man who brazenly attacks a military base, a murderer who has killed dozens of soldiers, and you still want to make contact. Maria Hill met his gaze, her expression unreadable. If you disagree with my decision, Director, you can file an appeal with the Council. With that, she turned away from him and addressed the agent. Continue. Yes, Commander. Quote. Nick Fury's eye glinted. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the command center. The moment he was back in his office, Nick Fury pulled out his phone, found the number of the old friend he had called to check on during the Quantico incident, and dialed. Attacking the Quantico military base. Brazenly murdering a member of the Avengers Initiative. This was no longer a simple crime. This required a heavy hand. Hawk had to be controlled. Under his supervision. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. #bonus chapter every 300 ps. If you like the story, please leave a review. #add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators' thoughts. 18 comments 0 vote. 76 Nick Fury's dangerous game and a weakened Hawk. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. Nick Fury didn't believe he had done anything wrong. If he hadn't stopped that jet from taking off, if he hadn't warned Tony Stark, a nuclear bomb would have detonated over New York City. What would have become of the city then? A wasteland. A ghost town. The Council didn't care about any of that. For them, it was black and white. I gave an order, and you didn't just disobey it, you led a full-scale mutiny. The fact that everything worked out didn't matter. As far as the Council was concerned, merely suspending his operational authority instead of kicking him to the curb was an act of extraordinary mercy. But Nick Fury didn't see it that way. He had been looking for a way to get his authority back ever since. And now, he saw his chance. The Hulk was a member of the Avengers Initiative. Hawk brazenly killing him was a slap in the face to S.H.I.E.L.D., and by extension, a slap in the face to the Council. The Council might not care about it now. But that was only because the situation hadn't escalated. If it did, who would they back? The pragmatic Commander Hill, who advocated for peaceful contact, or him, the man who insisted on strict control? The answer was obvious. As for who could escalate the situation for him, Fury already had the perfect candidate in mind, now that he knew Hawk was likely the same man who had caused the lockdown at Quantico. Thaddeus Ross. He was a dangerous man with powerful connections. Any other general would have been sidelined for good after the fiasco in New York with the Hulk and the Abomination. But General Ross. He'd not only been unaffected, he'd arguably come out of it with a promotion. It was basic political reality. The military-industrial complex had its champions, and Ross was one of their top generals. He was a complete hawk in the Republican Party, a man who believed every problem could be solved by throwing enough firepower at it. There was a quote from an old war anime that fit him perfectly. "Gentlemen, I love war." That line could have been tailor-made for General Ross. Others might be afraid to escalate a situation, but General Ross would relish the opportunity. Soon, the call connected. "Fury, I'm in the middle of the man who attacked your military base. Interested in making a deal." Quote. General Ross, who had been standing guard at home to prevent his daughter from sneaking out, froze. His expression turned grim. "You found him." "We did. Interested." Your terms. Ross was no fool. He wasn't about to agree to anything blindly. Nick Fury leaned back in his office chair, his one good eye glinting with a deceptively simple cunning. "My operational authority has been suspended." General Ross laughed. Of course he knew, it didn't surprise him one bit. If this had been one of his soldiers, any subordinate who not only ignored orders but actively fought against them would have been dragged out and executed. "Sorry, Fury. He also killed the Hulk. Just this morning." Wait. General Ross, who had been about to mock Fury for his weak bargaining chip, froze. The smile vanished from his face. "What? You heard me. The Hulk is dead. He killed the Hulk." Fury could hear the change in Ross's breathing over the line. The general was hooked. "Help me get my authority reinstated, and I'll give you the killer's identity. We'll run a joint operation. When we catch him, he'll be under our combined supervision, just like the Abomination." How does that sound? General Ross alone wasn't enough to get his authority back. But the people backing Ross were. For them, it was a simple matter of making a phone call. And it was a good deal for him, too. Joint supervision. After the capture, Ross could run his studies, and S.H.I.E.L.D. could run theirs. General Ross's mind was racing as he processed the terms. Absorbs gamma radiation. Kills the Hulk. If this information was true, it meant only one thing. The attacker from Quantico was stronger than the Hulk, and far more in control of his power. He wasn't some mindless beast like Bruce Banner became. And if they could capture him, study him, then. The more Ross thought about it, the more excited he became. But with that excitement came a cold, calculated caution. His name. No. Nick Fury laughed. "That's not how a deal works. Reinstate my authority, and then we can have our joint operation." General Ross snorted. "Does Maria Hill know about this?" "She does." "Then why don't I just work with her?" "Because you won't." Nick Fury wasn't worried in the slightest. "You and Maria Hill don't see eye to eye." Ross was silent. He knew Fury was right. After a long moment, he said, "I need to think about it. Be my guest. But I'd make it quick. We don't have much time before Maria Hill decides to make contact. Give me 30 minutes. With that, General Ross hung up. He closed his eyes, his mind working at lightning speed. Nick Fury listened to the dial tone, then hung up with a smile. Ross would agree. He had no doubt. But, never put all your hopes on one horse. Nick Fury's eye once again gleamed with that strange, cunning light. His mind raced, and then an idea struck him. He opened his computer and pulled up Gwen Stacy's file. He stared at the photograph of Gwen on the screen, and the glint in his eye became darker, and far more reckless. Meanwhile, Gwen had just helped Hawk back to his apartment in Queensbridge Park. Thump. After settling the weakened Hawk onto the sofa, Gwen straightened up, grimacing as she pressed her fist against her lower back. Leaning back on the sofa, Hawk saw this and couldn't help but chuckle. Gwen, who had been stretching, her back still to him, froze. The laugh had been a little too strong, a little too full of energy. She slowly turned around, her back still to him, and her suspicious gaze fell on Hawk, who, despite his supposedly weakened state, now had a healthy color back in his cheeks. Gwen's expression became strange, and a little dangerous. Hawk. Hawk cleared his throat, his voice suddenly becoming weak again. Cough, what's wrong? Gwen's eyebrow shot up. Her voice rose several octaves. Hawk. It was the tone she used when she was serious. The one that meant she was about to call him out on his bullshit. You're fine now, aren't you? You're just pretending. No, it wasn't me, I didn't do it, don't talk nonsense. Hawk's denials were immediate and reflexive. Gwen smiled. The next second, she spun around and marched toward the door. Without a moment's hesitation. Shit. I overplayed it. Leaning on the sofa, Hawk cursed internally. His figure blurred, vanishing from the sofa and reappearing in front of the apartment door, blocking her path. Gwen stopped, stunned, then looked up at him. Move. No. He might not be a master of emotional intelligence, but he knew when to stand his ground. If he let her walk out that door now, he'd be in the doghouse for weeks. Gwen's face tightened with cold fury. Do you think it's funny to lie to me, Hawk? No, it's not. I'm sorry. I was wrong. Hawk admitted his mistake without hesitation, then added, but I wasn't really lying. I really was weak when we were driving back. It was the truth. When he'd first gotten out of the lake, another Chitauri soldier probably could have been enough to knock him into his rebirth cycle. Hawk looked at Gwen. But I fell asleep in the car and recovered a bit. I was going to tell you, but, seeing you so worried about me, helping me upstairs. I was happy. So. Listening to his explanation, the frost on Gwen's face slowly began to thaw. She glanced at him. So what? I didn't want you to let go of me, Hawk said it with a dead serious expression. Hearing his reason, the last of the anger on Gwen's face melted away, replaced by a faint blush. Then, as if remembering something, she rolled her eyes at him. Idiot. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have lied to you. So, are you still weak now? Not weak. Yes, weak. Hawk watched her expression, found the correct answer, and nodded emphatically, his voice becoming frail once more. Gwen had to fight back a smile. She kept her face straight, rolled her eyes again at the weakened man before her, and stepped forward, taking his arm as if he were about to collapse. If you're so weak, you should be in bed. Come on, I'll help you. Okay. Careful. Take your shoes off. Gwen. Yeah. Can you lie down with me for a bit? What? Just for a bit. You know. I'm really weak right now. Just for a bit. Yeah. Alright. Wait, what are you do? Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. #bonus chapter every 300 ps. If you like the story, please leave a review. #add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators' thoughts. 2 comments 0 vote. 77 The Christmas gift from the military bonus. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. The Christmas of 2012 didn't look much different from any other year. Holiday jingles played softly in the storefronts. Snowflakes drifted down from the sky. In the neighborhoods, children gathered in joyful packs, celebrating the special holiday. The entirety of New York City was immersed in the joy of Christmas. Families were out celebrating in restaurants or gathered at home around warm fires, celebrating the arrival of the holiday. Hawk, too, was reuniting with his family. Just as he did every year, he boarded a bus as dusk began to fall and made his way to Calvary Cemetery. He walked through the fresh snow to spend the holiday with his sister. Helen Stacy had invited him to spend the holiday with their family on Long Island. But he had politely declined. He knew that, barring any unforeseen circumstances, he and Gwen would eventually get married. They would become a family. But that was still in the future. And more importantly, he already had a family of his own. So, Hawk had declined Helen's invitation. Growing up, he had spent every Christmas with his sister, Anya. Even after she had passed away in 2009, he had come here every year to spend the holiday with her. Hawk knew how much his sister had loved the holidays, how much she had longed to be a part of the noisy, cheerful crowds, but her congenital heart condition had always forced her to watch from a distance. The memory of it still twisted his heart. The thought of her spending the holiday alone, even now. He couldn't bear it. In the cemetery, Hawk placed the food his sister Anya had always loved in front of her headstone. Then he leaned back against the cool marble and sat on the ground, gazing out at the distant scenery. The snow fell in thick, heavy flakes. It was strange. The snow had been falling for nearly 2 hours, covering the surrounding grounds in a pristine white blanket. But the ground around Hawk, and around Anya's headstone, was as dry as a summer's day. Like a tiger resting in a snow-covered field, the ground around him remained untouched, as if it were still summer. Hawk leaned against the headstone, his eyes gently closed as his consciousness sank into his cosmo. After 3 days of rest, his cosmo had completely absorbed the gamma energy he had taken from the Hulk. It felt entirely new. It had, without a doubt, ascended. Gamma energy was a very real power in the Marvel Universe. And by absorbing that real power, his cosmo had, in turn, become a little more real. It was still a long way from a true, complete universe, worlds apart, in fact. But even with just that tiny fraction of newfound reality, the difference between his old cosmo and his new one was like night and day. To put it another way, before, Hawk had needed to use the lake to drown the Hulk. Now, that was no longer necessary. If he were to face the Hulk now, even on land, assuming the Hulk was at the same power level, he could beat him to death with his bare hands. That was not an exaggeration. Most importantly, sinking his consciousness deep into his cosmo, Hawk looked up at the constellation blazing in his inner sky. The phoenix, brilliant, scorching, radiating an incomparable light. And among the stars, dozens of new ones had appeared. Yes, dozens of new stars. This was another unexpected reward from his successful revenge against the Hulk. Though perhaps it wasn't so unexpected. The way of the saint was the way of holy war. Every battle Hawk fought would add new stars to his cosmo, strengthening him, creating a feedback loop where he grew stronger with every fight. He planned to use these new stars to ignite the constellation of Draco, the dragon. The phoenix had given him the power of immortality and rebirth. Draco would grant him the might of the dragon and the dragon's guard. The unbridled power of a dragon and a defense that was second to none. That was the essence of Draco. Among all the saints, the dragon was the only one whose power grew even stronger when he cast off his armor. And besides, this was a dragon. The phoenix's call ignites the dawn. The dragon's roar shatters the horizon. Hawk slowly opened his eyes. He glanced at the photograph of his sister on the headstone, who seemed to be smiling at him. A soft expression touched his own face. The Hulk should be in hell by now. You probably saw it. Don't worry, the abomination is next. It won't be long. And be sure to tell Mephisto, if he isn't taking good care of you, when I get to hell, I'm going to twist his head off and use it as a urinal. Just as Mephisto had once done to Zarathos. Who's Zarathos? The Ghost Rider. Mephisto had defeated the ancient spirit, ripped his essence from his body, and shattered it into a million pieces. The power of the Ghost Rider was just a sliver of that original, immense power. Hawk's voice was gentle, as if speaking this way would allow his sister to hear him in hell. With his back against the headstone, Hawk closed his eyes and began to recount all the things from the past year that he thought might have amused his sister. In these moments, Hawk was no longer the quiet, reserved young man he usually was. He was very talkative. He even told her about today's top headline. Tony Stark's battle with the extremis-powered Aldrich Killian at the port of Rose Hill in Tennessee, and the spectacular fireworks display he had made with his Iron Legion. Quote. Last night, at the port of Rose Hill, Tennessee, a battle of unprecedented scale culminated in a hero's dramatic farewell and a startling public confession. After successfully thwarting the deadly threat posed by the terrorist Aldrich Killian and his extremist soldiers, Tony Stark made a stunning move. He ordered his remaining Iron Legion suits to fly into the sky and self-destruct in a priceless fireworks display that lit up the night. And just this morning, at 7 a.m., Tony Stark reappeared and gave an interview, stating, Leaning against the headstone, Hawk recited the morning paper from memory. The cemetery was silent, save for his voice. If a timid person had been passing by and heard that low, demonic whisper in the darkness, they would have thought they had just seen a ghost. After a while, Hawk's voice faded. He leaned against his sister Anya's headstone, as if he had fallen asleep. Just like last year, and the year before, Hawk planned to stay here and spend Christmas with his sister. After all, this would probably be the last time. Because next year, by Christmas at the latest, he would find a way to hell, and he would bring her back. Mephisto could either give him his sister, or he could die. There was no other choice. Time passed. The distant noises from outside the cemetery faded as the hours went by. In that moment, it felt as if all of New York City had fallen silent. But then, he heard it. A faint, rhythmic sound, carried on the wind, accompanied by a low, almost imperceptible tremor in the ground. Footsteps. The grinding of tank treads. The sounds grew louder, closer. At the same time, his phone began to vibrate in his pocket. He had silenced the ringer in case Gwen called, but he hadn't turned it off. Feeling the vibration, Hawk opened his eyes and pulled out his phone. He looked at the caller ID. It wasn't Gwen. It was Anna. Hawk thought for a moment, then answered the call. Hello. Hawk, I just got word. The military knows you're the one who broke into the Quantico base. They've locked onto your position and they've already sent a team after you. The moment he answered, Anna's urgent voice came through the phone. The message was clear. They're here to collect you. Hawk's brow furrowed. He released the tight control he normally kept on his five senses. Instantly, he heard the rumble of armored vehicles rolling across the ground. The clatter of weapons and gear as soldiers moved into position. Hawk didn't speak. He simply hung up the phone. His face was stone cold as he stood up and looked toward the sky, watching the armed helicopter in the distance, searchlight blazing, rotors thundering as it closed in fast. A moment later, the lead helicopter was directly overhead. Its searchlight slammed down, pinning him in a brilliant, blinding cone of white light. Thump 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 thump. The helicopter stabilized its position over the cemetery. The cabin door slid open, and a soldier took his seat behind a minigun, aiming the weapon, capable of firing hundreds of rounds a second, directly at the figure in the searchlight. At the same time, crash. Two armored vehicles, each mounted with some kind of sonic cannon, smashed through the cemetery gates. They drove straight through the rows of headstones, crushing them under their treads as they rumbled to a stop in front of Hawk. Click clack. Click clack. Federal soldiers poured in behind them. With the searchlights and sonic cannons in position, the soldiers all chambered their weapons. Some standing, some kneeling, they all aimed their rifles at the lone figure standing before them. War was about to begin. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. #bonus chapter every 300 ps. If you like the story, please leave a review. #add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators thoughts. 1 comments 0 vote. 78 1 storm after another bonus. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. The helicopter thundered overhead. Searchlights flooded Calvary Cemetery, turning night into day. On the ground, the two armored vehicles with their sonic cannons and the helicopter with its minigun formed a deadly crossfire, trapping Hawk in the center. The Federal soldiers' weapons gleamed under the harsh lights. And in the center of it all, Hawk just smiled. It was a wide, genuine, and utterly terrifying smile. Just then, a piercing screech came from the helicopter's loudspeakers, followed by the booming voice of General Ross, echoing across the cemetery. Hawk, you are surrounded. General Thaddeus Ross, who had mobilized his forces the instant he got Hawk's location, was watching from the command center at the Quantico military base. He stared at the image of Hawk on the main screen, caught in the spotlight with nowhere to run, and his voice was a low growl. You are under arrest for crimes against national security and the unauthorized breach of a military installation. Ross felt a sense of relief. His initial plan had been to send a special forces team, but learning Hawk's location was a public cemetery had changed his calculus. This wasn't Manhattan. This wasn't some city street. It was a cemetery. He'd faced no consequences for the destruction in Manhattan. What did he care about a cemetery? Ross was determined to capture Hawk. So, there was no more talk. From his command center in Quantico, Ross broadcast his voice across New York City to Calvary Cemetery. You have 10 seconds to surrender. Prepare to fire. As Ross's words fell, the minigun on the helicopter began to spin up, its barrels locking onto Hawk, ready to turn him into a bloody mess in less than a second. Beep. The two sonic cannons on the armored vehicles began to charge, their operators, hands steady on the controls. Click clack. The Federal soldiers surrounding Hawk chambered their rounds, and rocket launchers were shouldered, all aimed at their single target. Hawk followed the sound of Ross's voice, his gaze lifting past the blinding searchlights to the camera mounted beneath the helicopter. His eyes locked onto the lens, and it felt as if he were staring right through the void, making direct eye contact with General Ross in his command center. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. His voice was quiet, but it carried perfectly through the microphone, clear as a bell in the Quantico war room. Thaddeus Ross. I just remembered. I almost forgot about you. Thank you for reminding me. Quote. General Ross's expression faltered. Before he could even process the words, he realized what had happened. The man who had been standing in the searchlight was gone. Wah! Boom! Arg! By the time the searchlights found Hawk again, one of the armored vehicles was already airborne. The screams of the sonic cannon's operator were cut short as the overturned vehicle slammed back down to Earth, crushing him instantly. Before Ross could even react, the second vehicle was also sent flying through the air. Ross's eyes narrowed. Open fire. The helicopter, which had been hovering in place, began to move. The operator in the cabin gripped the controls of the minigun. In that instant, the minigun unleashed its fury, spitting a torrent of fire at the ground below. Pew 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 pew. A relentless storm of bullets rained down. It tore through the earth, sending dirt and shrapnel flying. It pulverized tombstones, turning sacred ground into a cratered wasteland. It ripped through the bodies of federal soldiers caught in the crossfire. Collateral damage. Fire. Boom. One of the soldiers, seeing Hawk send a comrade flying with a casual backhand, overcame his panic and fired the rocket launcher on his shoulder. The rocket, trailing a long plume of smoke, shot directly at Hawk. Hawk turned to face it. Crash. The rocket slammed into Hawk's chest, a direct hit that blossomed into a massive fireball, the shockwave engulfing two nearby soldiers and setting them ablaze. Did we get him? Not only was the soldier who fired the rocket overjoyed, but even General Ross, watching from his command center, felt a surge of triumph. But it was impossible. Before the look of joy could even fade from the soldier's face, Hawk strode out of the flames, the upper half of his shirt now burning away. Thump. The soldier felt a searing pain in his chest and instinctively looked down. He saw it. A fist-sized hole. Shit. Shoot him. The soldier in the helicopter, watching the bloody scene unfold in the stark light of the search lamp, cried out in shock and immediately swung the minigun back onto Hawk, who was now tearing away the burning remnants of his shirt. Hawk looked up. Ping ping ping. Tang tang tang. A hailstorm of bullets from the minigun slammed into Hawk. He didn't even try to dodge. The bullets struck his head, his face, and his bare torso, revealing a physique carved from pure steel. Bullets like these couldn't even scratch the Hulk. What chance did they have against Hawk, who had now absorbed the Hulk's gamma energy? Hawk took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on the helicopter above. The ground beneath his feet cracked as he launched himself into the air like a cannonball. The helicopter pilot screamed, yanking at his controls, trying to evade. Alas, it was too late. Boom. Like a human missile, Hawk shot straight through the helicopter. A split second later, a massive fireball erupted from the gaping hole in its hull, followed by a thunderous explosion. The flaming wreckage plummeted earthward, smashing through dozens of headstones before slamming into the ground in a cloud of dirt and fire. Quote. Far away in his command center, General Ross stared in disbelief at the static-filled main screen. The soldiers on the ground, who had just witnessed this inhuman feat, were completely frozen in shock. The surviving soldiers saw a streak of light land on the ground and shoot toward them. Their training kicked in, and they turned to run. But it was too late for them, too. Killing one is still killing. Killing two is the same. So killing 50 more. It was just a matter of numbers. In the blink of an eye, the tables had turned completely. The once aggressive federal soldiers were now like dogs with their tails between their legs, their screams and cries filling the night as they ran for their lives, wishing they had been born with more legs. They scrambled for the cemetery gates. One of the soldiers, hearing the screams of his comrades fade behind him, saw the cemetery gates just ahead. A flicker of hope ignited in his chest. The next second, that joy was frozen in place. Not just his expression, but his entire body. The soldier looked down and saw it. A bloody hand was holding a small, still beating thing in front of his face. Instinct told him it was his heart. That was the last thought the soldier ever had. His eyes went dark, his body went limp, and he crumpled to the ground. By the time Spider-Man arrived at the cemetery, all he could do was stare in disbelief. Peter, crouched on top of the cemetery wall, couldn't believe what he was seeing. The ground was churned up, as if it had been plowed by a tractor. Shattered tombstones lay scattered like broken teeth. The dismembered bodies of soldiers were strewn everywhere. In the distance, the bisected wreck of the helicopter was still burning. And then he saw it. The two overturned armored vehicles. The door of one of them had been kicked open from the inside, and a soldier, his head covered in blood, was struggling to crawl out. The next moment, the soldier, halfway out, seemed to sense something. He struggled to lift his head. And saw Hawk, barricaded, standing before him, his face devoid of all emotion. The soldier opened his mouth. I only. Splat. Quote. Peter flinched as he watched the soldier's head explode like a watermelon. By the time he recovered, Hawk was gone. Where did he go? Peter shot a web and swung down into the carnage. He landed softly and saw him, standing a short distance away, his hand gently tracing the photograph on a small, simple headstone. Hawk's right hand traced the picture of his sister, a fire now burning in his heart. Peter walked cautiously toward him. Ha! Peter. Hawk pulled his hand back and turned to face him, cutting him off. If someone tried to destroy Uncle Ben's grave, what would you do? What? Uncle Ben. Peter didn't even have to think about it. I'd kill them. This was not the Amazing Spider-Man, nor the tech-savvy one. This was the original, a young man who, after his Uncle Ben was killed, had hunted down the robber and killed him, never once thinking of letting the law handle it. That was why Hawk liked this version of Peter Parker. He was shy and reserved, just like him. And just like him, he repaid every kindness and avenged every wrong. Hawk wasn't surprised by his answer. He gestured to Anya's headstone. This is my sister, Anya. Are you going to try and stop me from getting my revenge? Peter's eyes twitched. He looked at Hawk, at his emotionless face, and the inferno of rage burning deep within his eyes, and said nothing. He just silently stepped aside. Hawk smiled faintly. Thanks. Do you need help? Peter started to ask, but before he could finish, Hawk vanished from sight. He was left standing alone in the silent, ruined cemetery, the wail of distant police sirens finally reaching him. Shit. This is bad. This is really, really bad. Peter snapped back to reality. Bonus chapter at 2000 PS. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. Bonus chapter every 300 PS. If you like the story, please leave a review. Add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators thoughts. 15 comments 0 vote. 79 Hawk vanishes. Bonus. An early treat, so you don't have to wait until tomorrow. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. Something big had just happened in New York City. Media outlets with their ears to the ground had reporters scrambling back to their newsrooms from the moment the story broke. By the time the sun rose, the new headlines were ready. The New York Times, military's Christmas Eve cemetery raid leads to massacre, Calvary Cemetery turned into a slaughterhouse. The Wall Street Journal, another disaster for General Ross, Calvary Cemetery carnage likely a botched Hulk operation. Global Observer, 77 dead, helicopter engulfed in flames, countless graves destroyed. What did the U.S. military do? There was no way to cover up what had happened at Calvary Cemetery. And so, countless New Yorkers woke up, saw the headlines, and for those who had loved ones buried in Calvary, their world came crashing down. They all rushed to the cemetery as fast as they could. But it was too late. The military had already locked it down. Faced with a growing crowd of people screaming that their family members were inside, demanding to be let in, the soldiers on guard duty were unmoved. Following their orders, they chambered their rounds and stared down the police barricade. If anyone crossed the line, they would not hesitate to open fire. Are you kidding me? We couldn't handle last night's monster, but you think we can't handle you worthless civilians? The concept of the military serving the people was a foreign one here. When disaster struck, the military didn't show up to save you, they showed up to control you. The crowd was furious. They immediately unfurled banners, facing off against the soldiers from across the barricade in protest. The mayor of New York was at his wits' end. When Manhattan's taxpayers saw the news, they were reminded of the last time the military had acted on its own and the damages it had caused. Those with connections were on the phone directly to the Pentagon. Those with money but no connections were calling the mayor's office. The message was simple: Get this under control, or we'll find a mayor who can. The mayor himself was cursing the military with every breath he took. The military had always been reckless. But no one could have imagined they would be this reckless. Turning a cemetery into a battlefield, pulverizing countless headstones, and shattering countless more. What the hell were they thinking? Were they on a mission, or were they there to dance on people's graves? The mayor, his face ashen, immediately called a press conference. He didn't mince words, directly calling out the Pentagon and demanding a full explanation for the incident. The Pentagon pretended it couldn't hear him, offering no response whatsoever. Washington was silent. Quantico was silent. At least. On the surface. But for Gwen, who was still on vacation with her family on Long Island, the news was anything but silent. Calvary Cemetery. Last night. Hawk. Gwen frantically pulled out her phone and dialed his number. It was off. A jolt of fear went through her. Just then, on the television in her bedroom, a news anchor was reporting on the events at Calvary Cemetery. In the world of 24-hour news, there was no time for restraint. You either reported the story, or you lost your ratings to the channel that did. So, for the sake of ratings and ad revenue, the television stations ignored the calls from Washington telling them to play dead. They raced against each other, desperate not to be scooped, broadcasting exclusive photos and information their resourceful reporters had managed to acquire. When the anchor held up a photo of Spider-Man at the scene, an image they had just purchased for $500, a name flashed in Gwen's mind. Peter Parker. Gwen's eyes lit up. She grabbed her phone again, found Peter's number, and called him immediately. This time, the phone wasn't off. It connected quickly. Gwen. Peter, was it Hawk last night? Gwen got straight to the point. Did you see where he went? Peter was silent for a moment on the other end, then he scratched his head. I just saw the news about Calvary Cemetery myself. Last night, Hawk was. A spike of pain shot through Gwen's temple. Peter. Sigh. Peter hesitated. Hawk's okay. The fight was already over by the time I got there. After instinctively answering her question, Peter couldn't help but ask, did Hawk tell you who I am? Hearing that Hawk was safe, Gwen let out a sigh of relief. She heard the confusion in Peter's voice and replied quietly, I'm not an idiot, Peter. You changed so much, and you suddenly became friends with Hawk. It wasn't hard to guess you were Spider-Man. Peter nodded on the other end, accepting her explanation. Where is he now? I can't reach him. I don't know. Peter. I really don't know. Peter said quickly. Hawk left too fast. He just asked if I was going to stop him. I said no, so I stepped aside, and then he was just gone. As he spoke, a thought occurred to him. By the way, Gwen, I thought Hawk went to Long Island with you. What was he doing at Calvary Cemetery last night? Gwen paused, then pressed her lips together. Hawk has a sister, Anya. She passed away in an accident back in 2009. She's buried in Calvary Cemetery. Every Christmas, Hawk goes there to spend the day with her. So it really was his sister, Peter said, surprised. Gwen raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Before he left, Hawk asked me what I would do if someone desecrated Uncle Ben's grave. Quote. Anya's grave was damaged. Gwen's heart sank, and her voice rose with alarm. Peter quickly clarified, no, the headstone looked fine, it wasn't damaged. It's just. Just what? Peter thought back to the scene, to what he'd seen behind the headstone as Hawk was leaving. A grave next to hers was blown up, and it kicked up some dirt onto hers. It's over. Hearing Peter's answer, only one thought remained in Gwen's mind. No one understood what his sister meant to Hawk better than she did. She had no doubt that even if they were married, on Christmas Eve, he would still choose to be with Anya. Just then, Gwen heard Helen's voice from outside her room. Gwen. Coming. Gwen called back. She quickly told Peter, let me know if you hear from Hawk, then hung up. She took a moment to compose herself, then opened her door and headed downstairs. Mom, what's wrong? Before she even finished the sentence, as she reached the bottom of the stairs, she saw a familiar face. A very familiar face. Natasha, the woman she had knocked out with a tree branch, was standing in the doorway, smiling and talking with her mother. A chill ran through Gwen. Helen saw Gwen and smiled. Natasha said you let her borrow the car. She's here to return it. Natasha turned, smiling at Gwen as she approached. Morning, Gwen. Morning. Gwen was silent for a moment before replying. After a few words with her mother, she followed Natasha outside. Her yellow Corolla, now fully repaired and looking brand new, was parked quietly by the curb. Go on, check it out. I didn't break anything. Quote. Gwen listened to Natasha's words but said nothing. She opened the driver's side door and got in. Natasha slid into the passenger seat beside her and closed the door. Gwen took a deep breath and looked at her. Are you here to kill me? What? Natasha was taken aback, then she smiled and shook her head. No, of course not. You didn't kill me, why would I kill you? Gwen stared at her. But you sent people to kill Hawk. Natasha shook her head again. Last night's attack wasn't us. In fact, if it hadn't happened, I wouldn't be here talking to you right now. The events at Calvary Cemetery had caught the entire city off guard. Including S.H.I.E.L.D. Maria Hill couldn't believe it. 1 minute, she was gathering intelligence, trying to figure out how to make a peaceful first contact. And then the military had just gone in, guns blazing. Unbelievable. Did you even do a threat assessment? By the time Maria Hill had found out, it was too late to wonder why the military had been so reckless, or even how they had found Hawk in the first place. Her first act was to contact Natasha, who had only just returned from Tennessee and hadn't even had time to rest, and order her to take the newly repaired yellow Corolla and find the only lead they had. Gwen. Natasha's face became serious as she looked at Gwen. Gwen, we need to find Hawk. If this situation gets any bigger, it's not going to end well. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. #bonus chapter every 300 ps. If you like the story, please leave a review. #add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators' thoughts. 16 comments 0 vote. 80 leveled the Ross family's cemetery. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. Gwen's face went completely blank as she stared at Natasha. I don't know. Quote. Natasha stared back, her own voice low and steady. Last night's incident really wasn't us. If we were coming for you, we would have been here long ago. Why wait until now? Gwen ignored her. Are you here to arrest me? No. The moment the word left Natasha's lips, Gwen pushed open her car door and got out. Natasha opened the passenger door and followed, watching as Gwen shut the driver's side door. Gwen's voice was calm. Thank you for bringing my car back. Quote. Natasha frowned as Gwen turned and walked back toward the house without another glance. She watched her go, then, after a moment of silence, turned and opened the door of a black van parked nearby. The moment she was inside and the door was shut, Natasha contacted Maria Hill, who was running the show back at the S.H.I.E.L.D. Triskelion. Commander. What's the situation? She's not talking. Natasha reported the facts. She could have grabbed Gwen, tortured her for information, and forced her to give up Hawk's location. But the memory of waking up after the attack, alive and unharmed, flashed through her mind. The thought of harming Gwen was dismissed before it could even fully form. Maria Hill didn't sound surprised by her answer. Don't bother. We've found him. Natasha paused. You found Hawk? Yes. Quantico. No. New Mexico. New. Natasha was stunned. What the hell is he doing in New Mexico? Maria Hill looked at the video an agent in New Mexico had just sent her. After a moment of silence, she said, the Ross family cemetery has been destroyed. As she spoke, Natasha pulled out her phone, which had just received the same file. She opened the video. The scene was one of utter devastation. As far as the eye could see, headstones were shattered, graves had been blasted open, and splintered coffins and skeletal remains littered the entire cemetery. And that wasn't even mentioning the Ross family estate in front of it. As the camera panned, the once magnificent mansion was now a smoldering ruin. Natasha was stunned. Our agents in New York just confirmed it. The damage to Hawk's sister's grave was minor, likely from last night's battle. It seems clear that the destruction of the Ross estate and their family cemetery was Hawk's retaliation. Hiss. Natasha drew in a sharp breath. A thought occurred to her. Does General Ross know? He does. He must be losing his mind. Natasha said, her eyes still glued to the video on her phone. If someone had done this to her family's resting place, she would have gone on a warpath. But, serves him right. Natasha thought with a grim satisfaction in her eyes. SHIELD was still in the middle of running threat assessments and planning a first contact, and the military had just charged in with no plan and no intel. Did they really think that just because Hawk's name sounded a little like Hulk's, he was another Bruce Banner? Just because Banner ran when you chased him, did you really think everyone would? Well, now they knew. The more arrogant they were at the start, the more painful the payback. Natasha marveled at the sheer audacity of it, then she froze. Commander, that's not right. New York is a long way from New Mexico. It's only been 6 hours since the incident. How could he have gotten there so fast? To be precise, it took him less than 3 hours to get to New Mexico. What? Natasha was shocked. That's impossible. But it's a fact, Maria Hill said, her voice grim. And right now, his speed isn't the issue. If I'm right, his next stop is Quantico. Hawk killing the Hulk for revenge was one thing. But leveling the Ross family cemetery sent a much clearer message. Hawk repaid every wrong. So, if he would go so far as to destroy their family cemetery, what were the odds he would spare Thaddeus Ross, the man who had ordered last night's attack? Though SHIELD had once again lost track of Hawk, Maria Hill was certain of his next destination. Quantico. Natasha frowned as she processed Hill's prediction. So, what are my orders? Stay put. What? Maria Hill's voice was firm. Find a way to stay close to Gwen. Until this is over. Natasha raised an eyebrow. Commander, are you saying? It's not confirmed. But we need to be prepared for the worst. And Natasha, this conversation stays between us. Understood. Understood. Then what about? Natasha nodded, then glanced at the 3 other SHIELD agents in the van, who were all busy with their own tasks. Maria Hill seemed to know what she was thinking. The team with you was handpicked by me and Victoria Hand. They'll be responsible for external security until this is over. Natasha understood. Yes, Commander. Hill out. In her office at the Triskelion, Maria Hill ended the call and tossed her phone aside. She leaned back in her chair, subconsciously massaging her temples. Her initial plan had been to recall Natasha. But, just as she was about to give the order, an instinct, a sudden jolt of intuition, had made her change her mind and order Natasha to stay and protect Gwen. Because she had a feeling that the military, unable to defeat Hawk head-on, might try to use Gwen as bait. It wasn't just a feeling. It was an assessment based on her years of service in military intelligence. To win a war, the military would stop at nothing. The only reason Ross hadn't used the Hulk's girlfriend, Betty, as bait was because she was his own daughter. If it had been anyone else, Ross would have had her kidnapped and set a trap for the Hulk to walk right into. And now, Hawk had just desecrated his family's graves. It was a precaution she had to take. And after thinking about General Ross, another name came to mind. Maria Hill looked up, her gaze drifting toward Nick Fury's office. Her gut was telling her that Nick Fury's fingerprints were all over the military's sudden attack on Hawk. Of the 77 dead federal soldiers found at the scene, one of them had been identified by SHIELD's New York office as a fake. It was one of theirs. And very few people within SHIELD even knew Hawk existed. Of those who did, she had given a direct order forbidding any contact or investigation without her command. Maria Hill had a strong suspicion that the agent who had died in New York had been sent there by Nick Fury. The timing was too perfect. Yesterday afternoon, the World Security Council had abruptly reinstated Fury's operational authority. The military attack that night. Was it really possible there was no connection between the two events? As Maria Hill was lost in thought, the phone on her desk rang. Hello. Commander, we have a possible sighting of Hawk. Maria Hill was on her feet in an instant, heading for the door. By coincidence, the door to the office opposite hers opened at the same time. Nick Fury, his operational authority fully restored, stepped out. Maria Hill didn't wait. She strode directly to the commander's private elevator and descended to the command center. A few moments later, she and Nick Fury entered the room, one after the other. Where is the damn criminal now? Before Maria Hill could even speak, Nick Fury strode past her, his voice booming with its old authority. He glanced at her as he passed and smirked. Sorry, Commander. We're not in a state of war. Maria Hill gave a stiff, professional smile and said nothing. She was the deputy director and the acting commander in a time of crisis. Only then did her authority supersede his. But now, with his powers restored, Fury was in charge. Director. We had a possible sighting of Hawk in Maryland. Put it on the screen. An agent complied. An image from what looked like an ATM camera filled the screen. It was blurry, a figure moving so fast he was practically a ghost. Fury stared at it, then let out his signature catchphrase. Motherfucker. You have any other pictures? No, sir. Analyze his destiny. Sir. An agent at the main console, having just received a new piece of intel, turned to face them, his voice urgent. There was an explosion at the Quantico military base. 5 seconds ago. Quote. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. Bonus chapter every 300 ps. If you like the story, please leave a review. Add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators' thoughts. 1 comments 0 vote. 81 a show of force. Bonus. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. The moment Hawk left the cemetery, he unleashed his cosmo and became a blur of pure, unadulterated vengeance. His destination was clear. New Mexico. General Ross's ancestral home, the Ross estate, and the Ross family cemetery behind it. Every wrong must be avenged. Since Thaddeus Ross had the balls to spit on his sister's memory, Hawk would grant him his wish and send his entire family's graves up in smoke. Success depends on preparation, without it, failure is certain. Hawk was the type to think things through, and he had already gathered all the publicly available information on Thaddeus Ross online. Family estates, cemeteries, that was all public record. And so, with his Cosmo burning at full power, Hawk had crossed the country on foot to New Mexico, leveled the Ross family cemetery, and then immediately turned around, racing back toward Quantico. It had taken him less than 3 hours to get from the East Coast to New Mexico in the West. It took him another 3 hours to get from the West back to Quantico. But simply destroying the Ross family cemetery had not been enough to quell his rage. In fact, it had only fanned the flames. On one hand, Thaddeus Ross had sent his men to desecrate his sister's grave. For that, Hawk had already sentenced him to death. Ross was a dead man. Not even God could save him now. On the other hand, Hawk wanted to solve this problem once and for all, to make an example of them and cut off any future trouble at the root. He might be a good person, but he refused to let others mistake his kindness for weakness. He would not stand for them thinking they could give him an inch and take a mile. Hawk didn't have the time to play their pointless games. He was busy. Vibranium. Finding a gate to hell. And the reality stone. Just a moment ago, while spending Christmas with Anya, Hawk had been seriously contemplating whether he even needed to go back to school after the break. He already had the acceptance letter from NYU Law, and he had more than enough credits to graduate from Midtown. Theoretically, he could just show up for the graduation ceremony and be done with it. He was thinking of heading straight to Africa in the new year. Therefore, hit them so hard the first time, they'll never come back for a second. He would beat them so badly, they'd never even think about crossing him again. And most importantly, on Christmas Day, Anna had sent him a gift, the location of the abomination. He was still being held in the Quantico military base, in an underground cell, to be precise. Hawk had been debating whether he should deal with the abomination first or go after the vibranium after the new year. Well, now he knew. Quantico had made the decision for him. They had even given him the perfect excuse. And so, from New York to New Mexico, and from New Mexico back to Quantico, Hawk had run. As he arrived in Maryland, he slowed his pace, taking a moment to center himself before once again pushing his Cosmo to its absolute limit. Fueled by 6 hours of simmering fury, Hawk had leapt from a hill overlooking the Quantico military base. He soared through the air, and with a roar that echoed across the entire installation, he unleashed the single most powerful punch of his life. Thaddeus Ross. Come out and die. Boom. Hawk's right fist shot forward. In that instant, time seemed to freeze. Space itself warped around him. A ghostly afterimage of his fist shot forward, and as it descended toward the 5-story building below, reality buckled and cracked like fragile glass. When the phantom strike connected, the entire building exploded into fragments. Crash, crash, crash. Only after the building had completely imploded did the sound catch up. A series of massive explosions rocked the entire Quantico military base. For the first time in months, the enemy attack sirens shrieked to life across the installation that sat adjacent to the FBI Academy and the CIA's Langley headquarters. Buildings shattered. The ground trembled. The five-story building collapsed in on itself, and the very earth around it seemed to have been struck by an invisible hammer from the sky, sinking inward. From above, one could see a massive, fist-shaped crater with the collapsing building at its center. VMMMM. Quantico's fighter jets scrambled, and one immediately banked toward Hawk, who was now arcing through the air, descending into the base. Target acquired. Request permission to engage. Weapons free. Roger that. The pilot rolled the jet onto its side, released a missile, and watched as it streaked toward the falling figure. Hawk, still in freefall, simply reached out his right hand. Clang. What? The pilot's eyes went wide with disbelief as he watched Hawk catch the missile in his bare hand. Their eyes met across the distance. Hawk gave the pilot a slow, predatory smile. The moment his feet touched the ground, he squeezed. Boom. The missile detonated, and a brilliant fireball engulfed Hawk. A look of triumph flashed across the pilot's face. Target destroyed. Whoosh. A streak of light shot out of the flames on the ground. In the blink of an eye, it had reached the jet. With a sickening thud, the pilot, the triumphant look still on his face, stared in horror at what he was seeing. Hawk, his clothes burned away but his body completely unscathed, gave the pilot a final, vicious smirk. The pilot instinctively reached for the emergency eject. But Hawk's fist was faster. Crack. The pilot's head exploded along with the cockpit's reinforced glass. The now uncontrolled fighter jet spun like a falling leaf, spiraling down toward the base's fuel depot. Boom. A secondary explosion, even larger than the first, ripped through the base. A pillar of fire shot into the sky, and the ground shook once more. A river of fire erupted from the fuel depot, instantly engulfing a dozen federal soldiers who were screaming like their mothers had just died as they ran for safety. Hawk, who had leapt from the jet the moment it lost control, landed gracefully on the ground. Rumble. The ground rumbled as a desert yellow tank rolled into view, its turret swiveling to lock onto him. The massive cannon fired, and the shell screamed through the air, impacting directly in front of him. A cloud of fire and smoke obscured him from view. Just as the soldiers inside the tank were reloading, Hawk, now barricaded, strode out of the smoke. In the blink of an eye, he was standing in front of the tank. With his left hand, he crushed the tank's cannon. With his right, he drove his fist into the tank's armor. The tank didn't fly backward. Hawk's fist plunged into the thick metal as if it were tofu. His entire arm disappeared inside. He opened his hand and grabbed the stunned driver. The next second, he yanked the driver back out through the hole. A sickening, wet-tearing sound, like meat being forced through a grinder, filled the air. What emerged was a mangled, unrecognizable mess where a head used to be. It turned out that while the tank's armor was like tofu to him, it wasn't for anyone else. The other soldiers inside the tank stared, their eyes wide with terror, at the inhuman scene unfolding before them, their minds replaying the image of a man being squeezed through a fist-sized hole. Just then, hiss SS. An air-to-ground missile screamed down from the sky and slammed into the tank. The armored vehicle exploded, launching into the air in a massive fireball. Hawk looked up. Another jet. This one was smarter. It had fired its missiles and was already breaking away. More tanks rolled out from the base's depot, all painted the same dull yellow as they spread into formation. But every single cannon focused on one target. The roar of jet engines filled the air as three more fighters swooped in and immediately opened fire. Three more air-to-ground missiles came screaming down. Boom, 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 boom. Hawk moved. A blur of motion, weaving through the explosions, the fire, the shrapnel. Whoosh. Boom. Explosions. Flames. Deep craters. And crash. A tank was lifted from the ground and thrown into a nearby barracks, which erupted in a massive explosion. Then, a second tank, a third, a fourth. Hawk moved between them like a phantom. You think he was just going to stand there and take it? That was just a warm-up, a demonstration of how tough he really was. Proof that their weapons couldn't even scratch him. Now that he'd made his point, it was time to show them what real power looked like. No. This wasn't just about power. This was a statement. A demonstration of absolute dominance. Hawk was going to use this war to teach them one simple, brutal lesson: he wasn't the Hulk. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. Bonus chapter every 300 ps. If you like the story, please leave a review. Add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators' thoughts. 4 comments 0 vote. 82 money falls silent bonus. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. Buildings were coming down everywhere. Across the entire Quantico base, black streaks of energy carved through structure after structure, sending concrete and steel crashing to the ground. In the family housing district, screams echoed as men and women scattered in panic. The sky itself seemed to weep, the fires from below painting the clouds a hellish red. The earth was trembling, the collapsing buildings slammed into the ground with a deafening roar. In the half an hour since Hawk had arrived, this heartland of federal power had been transformed into a war zone more brutal than any battlefield in Afghanistan. Armored vehicles, worth millions of dollars, lay scattered across the ground, burning wrecks of twisted metal. Tanks, worth tens of millions, had their cannons ripped off, smoldering where they stood. Even the fighter jets, each a marvel of engineering worth hundreds of millions. Well, there were no more fighter jets. Every last one of them had been turned into an exploding pile of scrap, no different from the tanks and armored cars. When violence begins to speak, money falls silent. Oh, God. Fire. Crack. With an emotionless backhand, Hawk sent a soldier, who had been screaming in terror while firing at him, flying. Hawk glanced down at the white marks the bullets had left on his skin, then looked up at the other soldiers before him. Or rather, at the soldiers who were dropping their weapons and turning to run. Hawk watched them for a second, then felt the sting of bullets on his back. He turned, and his figure vanished. Arg! Hawk's right hand shot out. With a slight squeeze, he crushed a soldier's head, ignoring the blood that splattered across his body. His eyes were devoid of emotion as he watched another group of soldiers throw down their weapons and flee. He didn't chase them. Though he was on a rampage, in the last 30 minutes, he had inflicted billions of dollars in economic damage. But Hawk could, with a clear conscience, say that he was holding to his principles. He only killed those who tried to kill him. After half an hour of carnage, the soldiers on the base had clearly figured this out. After the armored vehicles were torched, the tanks exploded, and the jets fell from the sky, it was their turn. Aside from a few who hadn't gotten the memo and opened fire on Hawk, most of them just stood there with their rifles, some without even taking the safety off. So when Hawk appeared before them, they saw they're out. They dropped their weapons, screamed, and ran. Surrender, and you live. And it was true. Hawk didn't bother with the soldiers who dropped their weapons and fled. He had no desire to cause a needless massacre. This arrangement suited him just fine. He had come to Quantico for 3 things. Thaddeus Ross, the abomination, and to make a statement. Now, after killing another dozen or so soldiers who had fired on him, the sound of gunfire on the base had completely ceased. The statement had been made. That left 2 things on his list. Hawk ripped the uniform from a dead soldier's body and used it to wipe the blood from his face as he walked toward the base's command center, his steps as calm and unhurried as a leisurely stroll through the burning, ruined landscape. Nearly every building on the base was a wreck. Only the command center remained untouched. In fact, a fighter jet had spiraled out of the sky, on a collision course with the building. Just as it was about to impact, Hawk had appeared, kicking the multi-ton aircraft aside as if it were a toy. It wasn't an act of mercy. It was a simple matter of culinary preference. The main course is always served last. The people inside the command center weren't idiots. They'd seen what he was capable of. They knew he was saving them for last. So they tried to run. But they couldn't. With his senses fully open, Hawk gave the VIPs in the command center no chance to flee. The wrecked tanks and armored vehicles littering the ground less than 50 meters from the building were a testament to that. Even so, the command center was not an isolated island. Quite the opposite. In front of the building, dozens of soldiers had formed a human wall, aiming their rifles at Hawk. Thump. Thump. In the chaotic silence of the military base, Hawk's footsteps were perfectly clear as he walked toward them, wiping the blood from his face, leaving a trail of bloody footprints with every step. The footprints drew closer, and then the footsteps stopped. Hawk stood before the military command center. He finished wiping the blood from his arms, then casually tossed the blood-soaked uniform to the ground. The sound of the uniform hitting the ground made the soldiers at the door flinch. They raised their rifles at the man standing before them, unarmed, shirtless, hands casually in his pockets, his build radiating pure strength. But they couldn't bring themselves to pull the trigger, even as panicked VIP voices screamed desperately through their earpieces, ordering them to shoot. They had brains. If they weren't the unlucky bastards told to stick around and guard the big shots, they would have been long gone with everyone else. They hadn't fired a shot. And they had seen it with their own eyes. As long as they dropped their guns, the man before them would leave them alone. So, fire. For what? The shitty paycheck they got every month. It wasn't worth dying over. They were soldiers, not martyrs. They just needed an excuse to get the hell out of here. Hawk looked at the wall of soldiers blocking his path, their weapons all mysteriously still on safety by some unspoken agreement. He let out a quiet chuckle. Hey. Arg. Oh, God. Help me. The moment Hawk's laugh escaped his lips, it was like a dam burst. The soldiers dropped their weapons as one, screaming and shouting as they scattered in every direction, disappearing in seconds. A gentle breeze drifted through the now empty courtyard. The path to the command center lay wide open. Hawk just smiled. It was a genuine, unrestrained smile. Ha ha ha. Quote. Inside, the VIPs watched the main screen, their faces pale as they stared at the image of Hawk, standing before their building with a backdrop of burning tanks and dead bodies, laughing. They began to tremble. It wasn't from anger. It was from fear. Because in that moment, they understood one thing. Their lives were no more valuable than the lives of the soldiers outside. They were no more valuable than the multi-million-dollar armored cars, the tens of millions of dollars tanks, or the hundreds of millions of dollars jets. At least, not to Hawk. As Hawk's laughter subsided, he looked up, his eyes cold as he stared directly into the command center's security camera, as if making eye contact with the men inside. The next second, his voice, devoid of all emotion, reached their ears. Either you give me Thaddeus Ross. Or I'm coming in to kill all of you. You have 1 minute. 60. 59. Quote. He didn't give them a chance to react. He immediately began the countdown. Killing was one thing. But killing them wasn't enough, he had to break their spirit. More importantly, he needed to justify this to himself. Once the minute was up, if they hadn't turned over Ross, he could convince himself they were protecting him. Then their blood would be on their own hands. Soon, as he stood before the command center, his hands in his pockets, he began the final 20 seconds of his countdown. From inside the building, he could hear screaming, crying, and the sounds of a struggle. Hawk raised an eyebrow. A small, cruel smile touched his lips. He didn't stop his countdown, but he paused at the 8-second mark. Not because he had made a choice, but because the men inside had made one for him. Thump. Thaddeus Ross, the once mighty general who had turned Manhattan into a battlefield chasing the Hulk, was thrown out of the command center by the very VIPs who used to kiss his ass. Ross, his gray hair disheveled, tripped and went sprawling down the front steps. He cried out in pain as he rolled to a stop right at Hawk's feet. Ross struggled to get up. Just then. Stomp. Arg. Hawk lifted his foot from the tattered uniform and brought it down on Ross's head. With a slight pressure, Ross was pinned to the ground once more. He leaned down, his eyes narrowed as he looked at the gray-haired man beneath his foot. Thaddeus Ross. Arg. Ross's face turned bright red with rage as he roared and pushed against the ground, struggling to get out from under Hawk's boot. But it was useless. Bonus chapter at 2300 PS. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. Bonus chapter every 300 PS. If you like the story, please leave a review. Add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators thoughts. 14 comments 0 vote. 83, Ross, dead. Abomination, dead. Bonus. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. You know, I almost forgot about you. Hawk's voice was a low, contemplative murmur, yet it cut through the tense silence. He stared down at the man thrashing uselessly beneath the sole of his shoe. If you hadn't been so obsessed with hunting the Hulk, the Abomination never would have come to New York City. If the Abomination hadn't come to New York City, then the battle between him and the Hulk never would have happened. And if that battle hadn't happened, my sister wouldn't have died. His words built methodically toward an inevitable conclusion, cold, calculated, and absolutely damning. A slow, chilling smile spread across Hawk's face. Thank you for reminding me that you were a part of this, too. General Ross, who had been struggling beneath his foot, suddenly went still, as if he finally understood. Hawk's eyes were like ice. Wait. Squelch. Hawk brought his right foot down. A spray of red, like crushed watermelon, spread out from under his blue sneaker, a shoe that had cost less than $30, but one he had worn and cherished for years. General Thaddeus Ross. Dead. No more words. Hawk had no intention of listening to Ross's bullshit, nor did he feel the need to give him the chance to speak. He just needed to be dead. Behind him, Maria Hill, who had just arrived on the scene after rushing from the Triskelion, froze, her gaze fixed on the blue sneaker that had just crushed General Ross's skull. Hawk lifted his foot and wiped the sole on the tattered uniform on the ground. He then turned from the headless corpse and faced the newcomer. A face with sharp, clean lines. Ice blue eyes. A perfectly tailored shield combat uniform. A name came to Hawk's mind. Maria Hill. Quote. Maria Hill snapped back to the present, meeting his gaze. She took a deep breath. That's me. Hawk slipped his hands into his pockets and gave a slight smile to the woman who had the balls to approach him alone after that display. Can I help you? You've killed General Ross. What? He got what he deserved. Hawk's eyes narrowed, cutting her off. Tell me, Ms. Hill, if it was your sister who had died, what would you do? Maria Hill paused, not answering the question. She simply looked at him. Ross is dead. What are your plans now? My plans. Yes. Maria Hill nodded, holding his gaze. Internally, she was cursing Nick Fury. She and everyone else at S.H.I.E.L.D. had a clear view of Hawk destroying tanks with his bare hands and kicking fighter jets out of the sky. Logically, Nick Fury should have been the one to come here, not her. But the moment the situation had escalated, Fury had gone dark. No calls, no texts, no satellite tracking. He had simply vanished. Which left her, the deputy director, to clean up the mess. And she was now almost certain of one thing. Fury's sudden reinstatement and Ross's uncanny ability to track Hawk down were connected. Fury must have traded Hawk's location for Ross's political support. Unfortunately, Ross was now dead. Maria Hill's eyes flicked for a split second to the headless corpse at Hawk's feet before quickly looking away. Hawk listened to her question and just shook his head with a small smile. Ms. Hill, what happens next isn't up to me. It's up to you. Maria Hill processed his words. Ross is dead. You can leave. It was an offer. An unofficial truce. S.H.I.E.L.D. would look the other way. Not enough. What? The abomination. Hand him over. Hawk's expression was flat, his voice leaving no room for negotiation. He understood what she was offering. Ross was dead, so he could walk away and everyone would pretend this never happened. But the abomination was still breathing. Hawk's eyes shifted to the command center, where the VIPs were frozen at the doorway, afraid to step outside. You know the drill. 1 minute. Either you give me the abomination, or you're all dead. The moment he spoke, the VIPs erupted into a panic. Damn it, where's the abomination? He's in the underground cell. Let him out. Let him out now. Hurry. We've only got 30 seconds. Hawk listened to the tearful, panicked screaming and snorted in disgust. He turned back to Maria Hill and shook his head with something like pity. I guarantee you those are the same guys who backed Ross when he came after me. Probably thought I was just some nobody they could squash. Now that I'm standing here, they're shitting themselves because they know I could crush them like the insects they are. Maria Hill watched him. Are you going to kill them? Depends. On. I don't start fights, but I finish them. Hawk looked at Maria Hill and smiled. See, Ms. Hill. You're standing right here, perfectly fine. As he spoke. Thud. The ground shook violently. A section of the earth shattered, and a monstrous creature, even uglier than the Hulk, clawed its way to the surface. It was the abomination. But, the second his cell's electronic locks failed, he'd smashed his way out without hesitation. Breaking through to the surface, he was ready to roar and announce his return to the world, but the sight in front of him stopped him cold. Burning vehicles, exploded tanks, downed fighter jets, and nothing but destruction and bodies as far as he could see. What the hell happened? Is it the end of the world? The abomination was completely baffled. After a moment, his gaze was drawn to the small ant of a man standing with his back to him. A cruel smile spread across the abomination's face. If the Hulk was a creature of reluctant self-defense, the Abomination was a creature of wanton destruction. The man he had been was a soldier, obsessed with power. The monster was no different. And so, the Abomination attacked. ROARRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRR thundering steps, it launched itself skyward, its massive frame blocking out the sun, a twisted grin spreading across its face as it plummeted down to crush the tiny figure into paste. Hawk didn't move. His gaze was still locked on Maria Hill. Hill, out of the corner of her eye, saw the monster descending like a living meteor. The sheer pressure of its descent sent a shockwave across the ground, cracking the already shattered concrete. She stood her ground, refusing to back down or look away from the man in front of her. Her eyes stayed locked on Hawk's. Hawk looked at Maria Hill, felt the storm about to break, and smiled. Then he turned and threw a punch. Boom! The abomination's chest caved in. A thunderous crack split the air as it was launched backward like a cannonball of flesh and bone. It crashed into a burning tank. Crash! The abomination's massive body finally came to rest in a pile of rubble, and the 3 burning tanks that had been dragged along with him crashed down on top. Fire doesn't discriminate. The abomination's hulking frame was instantly swallowed by flames, and the sickening sound of burning flesh filled the air. The abomination. Dead. He had appeared and died in the same instant. Just one punch, and the fight was over. He'd already taken down the Hulk. If some creature that couldn't even beat the Hulk had actually given him trouble, what would that say about him? Would it be an insult to the Hulk? Or an insult to his Cosmo? Unlike the Hulk, the abomination's body didn't change back to human form as the flames devoured it. After all, Bruce Banner had been transformed by gamma radiation exposure. Emil Blonsky had injected the gamma serum straight into his bloodstream. Simply put, the abomination and Emil Blonsky were permanently fused, there was no going back. After throwing the punch, Hawk didn't give the abomination another glance. He turned back to Maria Hill. To him, she was the far more interesting creature here. Maria Hill's mind was replaying the image of Hawk killing the abomination with one casual punch, but she kept her expression perfectly calm. What now? What do you think? Hawk stuffed his hands back in his pockets, his gaze level with hers. Maria Hill met his gaze, her mind spinning as she recalculated everything she thought she knew. The Hulk is dead, the abomination is dead, and Ross is dead. The 3 people responsible for your sister's death are all gone now. They are. Go home. Ha. Hawk burst out laughing at her words. It was a laugh filled with derision. Maria Hill's heart skipped a beat. Nearby, the VIPs, still frozen in the doorway, began to tremble at the sound of his laughter. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. 84. I'll be waiting for you in New York. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. Hey. Go home. I just ran from New York to New Mexico to level the Ross family cemetery, and then ran all the way back here from New Mexico. What do you think I came here for? Do I look like I have nothing better to do? They started this war, not me. They may have decided when it started, but they don't get to decide when it ends. I do. Hawk's laugh died in his throat. His ice-cold gaze swept over the crowd of uniformed, well-dressed men huddled in the doorway, the so-called great men of the nation. Normally, these men would have exuded an aura of power and authority. But now, they were terrified. Anxious. Pathetic. Hey. You only learn when it's too late. You only change course after you've already crashed. You only feel regret when death is staring you in the face. But you don't feel regret. You just feel fear. Hawk took in the pathetic sight, then turned his gaze back to Maria Hill. There are only 2 ways this ends. Quote. May I hear them? Of course. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Hawk's lips. Compared to the sniveling cowards in the doorway, his opinion of the woman who had stood firm in the face of the abomination was relatively high. Hawk looked at her, his voice quiet and hollow, completely devoid of emotion. Since I'm already here, what's the difference between killing 1 or killing 2? 500, 5,000, 50,000, they're all just numbers to me. Quote. Hearing his words, a chill went down Maria Hill's spine. Hawk continued. After I kill everyone here, I'll go to the Pentagon. After I'm done with the Pentagon, I'll go to the White House. In short, they started this war, and a war can only have one victor. Either they kill me, or I kill them. Ms. Hill. Hawk paused, a small smile returning to his face. What do you think of that ending? His gaze once again swept over the men huddled in the doorway, trapped between coming and going. Hawk hadn't spoken loudly, but it was more than loud enough for them to hear every single word. And so, they broke. They collapsed. They begged. In the face of death, all men are equal. The powerful men, now slumped on the floor, saw Hawk's gaze fall upon them and began to plead for their lives. Their message was simple. The attack was Ross's idea. It had nothing to do with them. They begged Hawk to let them go, swearing he would never see them again. Hawk said nothing. He just watched their pathetic, tear-streaked performance with cold amusement. He had no doubt that right now, these men would pimp out their trophy wives if it meant saving their own skins. Beneath the polished veneer, a cesspool of corruption and depravity. As Hawk was enjoying the show, Maria Hill, having recovered from her shock, finally spoke. And the second ending. What second ending? Hawk turned back to her, a look of mock surprise on his face. You know, I'm not sure I like the second ending anymore. I think the first one is pretty good. Maria Hill met his teasing gaze. May I hear it anyway? Fine. Hawk thought for a moment, then shrugged. After a war, the victor is entitled to demand reparations from the loser. The moment he finished, before Maria Hill could even respond, the eyes of the VIPs lit up. We'll pay. We'll pay. We'll give you anything. Shut up. Hawk's ice-cold gaze once again swept over the noisy, pathetic men. They immediately fell silent, trembling like quail. Hawk sneered, then turned back to Maria Hill. I don't think I want that ending anymore. Maria Hill frowned slightly. Why not? I don't feel like it. Hawk shrugged. After what happened today, I won't be staying in the country much longer anyway. And if I'm leaving, why let them live? Better to end it once and for all, wipe them out, then clean out the Pentagon. I don't like the guy in the White House right now, either. Might as well take him out too. He said it so casually. But Maria Hill's blood ran cold. Because she didn't hear a trace of humor in his voice, and she didn't see a hint of a joke on his face. He was serious. He would really do it. Hawk saw the look of horror on Maria Hill's face and smiled to himself. He turned and started walking toward the group of VIPs. Just then, Maria Hill, seeing him move, drew in a sharp breath. She snapped out of her shock and ran, placing herself directly in his path. Wait, Hawk. Hawk raised an eyebrow, looking at her as she stood before the VIPs, protecting them like a mother hen protecting her chicks. Maria Hill's voice was urgent. This incident will not be made public. Is that so? Yes. Maria Hill nodded emphatically. And she was right. Quantico might have been turned into a raging battlefield, but very few people knew what had actually happened. SHIELD had intervened from the very beginning, cutting off all communications and signals from the base. So, aside from the people in Quantico, the Pentagon, the White House, and SHIELD, no one else knew. The people of Washington, D.C. still thought this was just another quiet holiday. Hawk listened to her words, a thoughtful expression on his face. But, he finished his consideration and shook his head. Not enough. Reparations. Maria Hill said quickly. You said it yourself. This was a war. Since they lost, they have to pay reparations. Hawk's gaze drifted past her shoulder, to the men behind her who were now as silent as the grave, wanting to speak but not daring to. The moment his eyes met theirs, they all flinched and looked away. They were scared shitless. Hawk considered it, then turned back to Maria Hill with a small smile. I want $1 trillion. You think they can pay that? Maria Hill's eye twitched. Hawk shook his head, his tone calm. 1 million. Quote. Each. Quote. Maria Hill instinctively turned and looked at the 30-plus powerful men trembling like quail behind her. 10 minutes later, Hawk looked at the tablet Maria Hill had handed him, saw the new balance in his Stark bank account, and then looked up. He met the pleading, desperate eyes of the men who had just transferred their fortunes to him. Get out. Yes, sir. We're going now. Let's go. Thank you. Quote. In the blink of an eye, the 33 powerful men scrambled over each other, cheering and thanking him as they disappeared from sight. Soon, the massive military base was empty, save for 2 people. Hawk handed the tablet back to Maria Hill. As she took it, she looked at him. You never intended to kill them, did you? Quote. Hawk, stuffing his right hand back into his pocket, just glanced at her and chuckled, not answering the question. You should go. And you? I'll be here for 1 hour. Hawk's voice was calm. His gaze went past her, to the security camera over the command center's main entrance. For the next hour, you can use any weapon in your arsenal to try to take me down. But remember, every action comes with a price. If, after 1 hour, you've accomplished nothing, don't say I didn't warn you. From this day forward, stay out of my way. If there's a next time, I'll level Washington, D.C. With that, he glanced at Maria Hill. You can go too, Ms. Hill. Or maybe S.H.I.E.L.D. wants to take a shot in the next hour. Since you're already here. Maria Hill immediately replied, this is a domestic federal matter. S.H.I.E.L.D. is only responsible for global peace. Hawk just laughed and said nothing, closing his eyes. Seeing this, Maria Hill didn't say another word. She turned and ran toward the S.H.I.E.L.D. jet parked a short distance away. As she boarded, she was already on the phone with the Pentagon. As the S.H.I.E.L.D. jet lifted off, the massive Quantico base was well and truly deserted. The sun set, the fires burned, and the ruins of the base were spread out under the dying light. Hawk stood in a clearing of twisted metal and debris, hands in his pockets, eyes closed in peaceful rest. The only sound across the entire base was the crackling of dying fires. Beyond the perimeter, the surviving soldiers held their breath, all eyes fixed on the destruction. Time ticked by. Soon, an hour, which can feel like an eternity or a fleeting moment, passed in the blink of an eye. Ring. A phone, lying on the ground in front of Hawk, began to ring. Hawk opened his eyes, looked at the ringing phone, bent down, and picked it up. Hello. Hawk. Gwen's voice came from the other end. Are you done? Almost. Then come home soon. Don't forget, we have our driving lesson tomorrow. Okay. Alright. I'm in New York, waiting for you to come home. Okay. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. #bonus chapter every 300 ps. If you like the story, please leave a review. #add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators' thoughts. 1 comments 0 vote. 85 The Phoenix Armor and the Reality Stone bonus. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. Their call was short. A simple question, a simple answer, and then it was over. After hanging up, Hawk stared at the phone in his hand, lost in thought. Then, an idea struck him. He looked up at the sky. His gaze seemed to pierce the crimson clouds, to tear through the atmosphere, and lock onto a high-definition communications satellite in orbit. In the S.H.I.E.L.D. command center, Maria Hill, now back at the Triskelion, stood with her arms crossed. Her face was calm, but her heart was pounding as she watched Hawk on the main screen, who seemed to be staring right back at them. She was worried he would interpret the call from Gwen as a threat. In reality, it wasn't a threat. It was a concession. Just go. Go back to New York. We'll pretend today never happened. She was out of options. A few warmongers at the Pentagon had been pushing hard for a nuclear strike against him. But what if it didn't work? Who'd take the blame when it all went to shit? The second they realized they'd be thrown under the bus, those same warmongers went quiet real fast. They were all for aggression, as long as someone else's ass was on the line. After all, if they made a move, Hawk would actually kill them. It was a gamble they weren't willing to take. And more importantly, they couldn't take it. The image of General Ross lying on the ground like a dead dog, his head completely gone, was still fresh in their minds. None of the generals at the Pentagon wanted to be next. And so, playing dead had become their only option. But playing dead was one thing. Hawk was still sitting in the middle of the Quantico military base. So, the Pentagon had thought of Maria Hill. Hill looked at the screen, at the man who seemed to be staring at her through the satellite's lens. She took out her own phone and dialed his number. Hawk, still looking at the sky, saw his phone ring again. He put it to his ear. Hello. Hawk. The reason, Hawk said, his tone flat. You get one chance to explain, Ms. Hill. Hill spoke quickly. The car. Hawk raised an eyebrow. Through the satellite feed, his expression was perfectly clear. Hill composed herself and quickly explained how Natasha Romanoff had gone to New York to return the repaired car to Gwen. Of course, she also explained that after Hawk had left New York, she had ordered Natasha to stay behind as a precaution, in case the military tried to use Gwen as leverage against him. She told him everything, except for her suspicion that Nick Fury had orchestrated the whole thing with General Ross. She had no proof of that yet. Hawk listened to her explanation and was silent for a moment. Then, his gaze fell from the sky. Thank you. You're welcome. Hearing his thanks, Hill let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Then, a thought occurred to her. I can arrange a jet to take you back to New York. Quote. All right. Hawk considered it, then accepted. After hanging up, he looked at the only building on the entire base that was still standing, and took a deep breath. His right foot slid back. The stone beneath it cracked under the pressure. The next second, boom. As Hawk's right fist shot forward, every window in the building exploded outward. The entire structure cracked and crumbled in seconds. With a thunderous roar, the last standing building on Quantico collapsed into dust and debris. Watching from the satellite feed, Maria Hill's eye twitched. The warmongers at the Pentagon watched, their hearts filled with terror. And in a secure location far from the Triskelion, Nick Fury watched, something dangerous flickering in his one good eye. Half an hour later, a shield jet lifted off from the ruins of the Quantico base. Only after it had completely vanished from sight did the soldiers who had been waiting outside the perimeter finally re-enter. The scene that greeted them was one of apocalyptic devastation. The ground was scarred and broken. Buildings were reduced to rubble. Armored vehicles, tanks, and fighter jets were nothing but charred, skeletal remains. And everywhere, there were bodies. But the thing that drew the most attention was a massive, charred corpse lying on a pile of rubble. Hiss. Is that the abomination? Where's his head? A few of the soldiers, their courage returning now that Hawk was gone, gathered around the corpse. They looked at the headless body of the abomination, then at each other. The next second, as if they'd all had the same thought, they looked up in the direction the shield jet had disappeared. Miles above the earth, Hawk relaxed on a plush sofa inside the jet. The charred, grotesque head of the abomination sat on the table in front of him like some twisted trophy. He stared at it for a moment, then shook his head and tossed it into a nearby trash bin. He had originally planned to bring the head back to his sister's grave as a gift. But his sister had always been timid. When she was little, she would jump into his arms if she saw a mouse. A gift this ugly would probably make her cry. So, he decided against it. After this war at Quantico, Hawk now had a very clear and complete understanding of his own power. On Earth, he was untouchable. But being the strongest on one planet didn't make him the strongest in the universe. Mephisto, Lord of Hell itself, was no ordinary enemy. He was a god. A dimensional god. Hawk was not yet strong enough to take what he wanted from a dimensional god. Even with his Cosmo now anchored in the Marvel Universe, the odds were stacked against him. In the Saint Seiya universe, Mephisto ranked alongside Hades, the king of the underworld. A freshly awakened saint, no armor, not even the sixth sense unlocked, going toe-to-toe with Hades right off the bat. That saint would have to be an idiot. And so, the armor is the key. And I need the reality stone. With it, I can make my Cosmo a permanent part of the Marvel Universe, not just borrowed power, but something that truly belongs here. That, and only that, is how I'll get my sister back from hell. The thoughts flashed through Hawk's mind, and he now had a clear plan. He had already identified 2 of the 3 materials he needed. All that was left was orichalcum, or as it was known in the Marvel Universe, vibranium. Once he had the vibranium, he could forge the Phoenix armor. And at that point, even if his Cosmo wasn't yet a physical reality in this universe, with his armor, he should be able to go toe-to-toe with Thor. After all, the Reality Stone's storyline was from Thor, the Dark World. That should happen next year, probably sometime in the second half. Just then, the door to the jet's cockpit opened, and a female SHIELD agent walked out. Sharon Carter. She was about to speak, but she froze, her eyes landing on the hideous head in the trash can. Mr. Hawk, that head. I don't want it. Hawk snapped out of his thoughts and followed her gaze. He shook his head. It's too grotesque. My sister would have been terrified. Sharon Carter laughed. I can see that. At first, she hadn't understood what Hawk had done today. But, after reading his file, she had a different perspective. You're a good brother, Mr. Hawk. Hawk glanced at Sharon and let out a short, humorless laugh. No, I'm not. If I were, my sister wouldn't have died. Seeing an opening, Sharon sat down on the sofa across from him. That wasn't your fault, Mr. Hawk. If your sister knew you had avenged her, she would be very happy. Hawk looked at Sharon but didn't speak. Sharon felt a slight jolt and blinked. What is it, Mr. Hawk? Did I say something wrong? No. Hawk shook his head, his gaze shifting away. So you agree with what I did? Sharon smiled. Professionally, I'm noncommittal. But personally, yes. However, if I had a brother, and if I were to die, I would want him to be happy. Not to live his life consumed by hatred. Hawk smiled faintly. I don't do forgiveness. Forgiveness is God's business, Agent Carter. My business is arranging the meeting. I see. Sharon was taken aback for a second, then she nodded thoughtfully. She looked at Hawk and said, almost as a joke, then I hope I never become your enemy, Mr. Hawk. Hawk laughed. As long as you're not my enemy, you're my friend. Understood. Sharon's eyebrow shot up, and she nodded with another smile. She shrugged. So, what are your plans now that you're going back to New York, Mr. Hawk? Hawk seemed to think of something. He looked at her. Driving lessons. Driving lessons. Yeah. Hawk nodded. He had money now. A lot of money. Half an hour later, the Shield jet touched down smoothly at a private airfield outside of New York City. As Hawk stepped out of the jet, the first thing he saw was Gwen standing next to the repaired yellow Corolla. She wore a yellow wool coat, arms crossed, watching him with a gentle smile. Hawk walked down the stairs and toward her. I'm back. I see that. Gwen's smile was radiant. Going home. Yeah. Come on, get in. Can I drive? No. You don't have your license yet. If you get caught, my father will haul you into court himself. Quote. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. Bonus chapter every 300 ps. If you like the story, please leave a review. Add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators' thoughts. 1 comments 0 vote. 86 a new home for a sister and a new home for Hawk. Bonus. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. Is it hard to get a driver's license in the United States? Not at all. Compared to the rigorous, multi-stage exams in other countries, getting a license in the US is ridiculously easy. As long as you could shift gears, turn, and hit the brakes, you could get a license. Of course, there was one catch. You had to bring your own car. The examiner would sit in the passenger seat, observing your habits and proficiency, and then decide if you passed. And so, at the entrance to the Manhattan DMV, Gwen was waiting. Her eyes lit up as she saw her yellow Corolla make a turn and head toward her, and she hurried over to meet it. Hawk unbuckled his seatbelt and got out. The examiner got out from the passenger side. Gwen walked up to Hawk, watching the examiner scribbling on a clipboard. She whispered, "How'd it go?" "Should be fine." Hawk whispered back. He wasn't entirely sure. When he was making a U-turn on 19th Avenue, some idiot jaywalker had decided to ignore the red light and step right out in front of him. Hawk had slammed on the brakes. His first instinct had been to hit the gas and send the idiot flying. But he had hesitated. Though glancing at the examiner's face at the time, he got the distinct impression the examiner would have preferred he'd hit the gas. He wasn't sure if he'd imagined it. As Hawk and Gwen were whispering, the examiner finished his notes and looked up at Hawk. "Mr. Hawk. Yes. A person who follows the rules should not have to yield to those who don't." Quote. Knew it. Hawk thought to himself. He met the examiner's eyes, which still held a hint of disappointment that he hadn't sent the jaywalker into orbit, and nodded seriously. "I'll remember that." The examiner saw the understanding in his eyes and smiled, handing the clipboard to Hawk. "Congratulations, Mr. Hawk. Thank you." Hawk's face lit up as he took the form. With this piece of paper, he could walk right back inside and get his official driver's license. But Gwen was clearly even more excited than he was. It was a rite of passage. The boyfriend drives. What others had, she would have too. And sure enough, the moment they walked out of the DMV, Gwen immediately surrendered the driver's seat to Hawk, whose new license wasn't even warm yet. Before, he didn't have a license, so she drove. Now that he had one, if she still drove, what was the point of him getting it? Her logic was flawless. Hawk had no counter-argument. By the time he opened the door and got back in the car, Gwen was already in the passenger seat, buckled in, a wide smile on her face as she looked at him. All right, Mr. Chauffeur, let's go. Quote. Hawk's lip twitched. He looked at Gwen, who was clearly happier about him getting his license than he was, but didn't say anything. He buckled his own seatbelt and pulled the car away from the curb. Where to? Didn't you say you wanted to go to St. Mark's Church? Yeah. Then let's go. All right. Hawk said nothing more and drove onto the road. Hiss. Oh my god, today's the last day of the break. Sitting in the passenger seat, Gwen was about to pull out her phone to take a picture of Hawk's new license when she noticed the date. Winter break was always shorter than summer break. It felt like they hadn't done anything, and now it was already over. It had been almost half a month since that evening when she had picked him up from the private airfield. He had returned on December 27th. It was now January 7th. But not January 7th, 2012. It was 2013. 7 days ago, both Hawk and Gwen had turned 18, the legal age to marry in the state of New York. But neither of them could work up the courage. Gwen might have. Hawk hadn't. He was terrified that the second they walked out of City Hall, George, Bullseye, Stacy would appear and put 8 bullets in his back. Of course, Hawk wouldn't die. But he couldn't say the same for George. And so, to avoid such a tragedy, Hawk had not eloped with Gwen on the day he officially became an adult. Half an hour later, they arrived at St. Mark's Church. Located near 2nd Avenue in Manhattan, St. Mark's Church in the Bowery was a historic landmark, built in 1799, and one of New York City's most famous buildings. But Hawk wasn't here to see the sights. He was here to move his sister. Calvary Cemetery was no longer an option. It had been nearly half a month since the military's disastrous raid, and the cemetery was still a complete wreck. Shattered headstones were everywhere. And the protests were endless. It was too loud. Besides, the day he'd returned, he'd already decided to find Anya a new place. He had money now. And since Gwen lived in Manhattan, and NYU was in Manhattan, he would eventually be moving to Manhattan as well. It wouldn't make sense for him to move to Manhattan and leave his sister behind in Queens. So for the past few days, he had been searching for cemeteries in Manhattan online. And he had found St. Mark's. Though its cemetery was small, it was quiet and shaded by trees. The first mayor of New York City was buried there. It was a place of peace and history. Unfortunately, like Trinity Church Cemetery, because of its limited space, St. Mark's was generally no longer accepting new burials. But this was New York City. A city where money talks, and rules walk. Ding. Thank you for your generous donation, Mr. Hawk. God bless you. I'd rather he bless my sister. He will. A smiling priest stood on an empty plot of land in the cemetery, holding a credit card machine in one hand while enthusiastically shaking Hawk's with the other. After setting a time for the move from Calvary tomorrow, Hawk and Gwen left the church. The priest waved them off with a wide, warm smile. Gwen glanced in the rearview mirror at the priest, who was still smiling and waving from the church steps, and her lip curled slightly. That priest is very enthusiastic. Of course he was. He had to be. Having found a new home for his sister, Hawk was in high spirits. He laughed. I bet you if I'd donated $5 million, that priest would have dug up the first mayor of New York and given his spot to my sister. Faith. That had gone out the window a long time ago. Ever since the Vatican had set the example with their fondness for little boys, there was no faith left to speak of. Gwen couldn't help but laugh at his words. Then, remembering she was a believer, she playfully punched his arm. Don't say that. God will hear you. Didn't you say you'd follow me to hell? Hawk glanced at her with a smile. Having second thoughts. Gwen rolled her eyes at him, then turned, her expression suddenly serious. I will follow you to hell. But I'll also drag you up to heaven with me. Hawk glanced at her and just shrugged, saying nothing. He decided against telling her the harsh truth, that while a heaven dimension might exist somewhere, it certainly wasn't connected to Earth. For them, it was hell or nothing. Gwen, seeing he had nothing to say, simply smiled and turned her attention back to the road. Then she blinked, confusion crossing her face as she watched Hawk turn onto a residential street near the church. What are we doing here? Buying a house. Hawk looked at a middle-aged woman in a realtor's blazer standing in front of a house with a, for sale, sign on the lawn. He pulled the car over to the curb and glanced at the surprised Gwen. His sister was moving. It was only right that he did too. Besides, now was the perfect time to buy. After the Battle of New York last year, the city's, and especially Manhattan's, real estate market had taken a nosedive. By the end of the year, prices had dropped by nearly 30%. Though they were still falling, the rate had slowed considerably. He figured that in less than 3 months, they would start to climb again. The house Hawk was looking at was a classic American home. It had a large lawn on either side of a stone walkway that led from the street to the front door. To the right was a 2-car garage, connected to the first-floor living area. Next to the garage was a shed for lawn equipment. It looked a bit like the White House from Mr. and Mrs. Smith, but the exterior of this one was a warm orange. The interior was even more impressive. A massive, open-plan living space. A fully equipped kitchen with a large center counter. A spacious master bedroom with a walk-in closet. A luxurious master bath. Hawk followed the realtor on a tour of the 3-story house, then they returned to the spacious, first-floor living room, with its massive fireplace. Gwen stared at the fireplace, her mind already painting a picture: snow falling outside, a fire roaring in the hearth, the two of them wrapped in a blanket on the floor. Hawk saw the look on her face and turned to the realtor. How much? As we discussed on the phone. $12 million, paid in full. All right. Hawk nodded, then took the bank card from his Stark bank account out of his pocket and handed it to her. I'll take it. Do you accept cards? Quote. Bonus chapter at 2900 ps. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. Bonus chapter every 300 ps. If you like the story, please leave a review. Add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators' thoughts. 13 comments, 0 vote. 87, a father's murder, an irreconcilable feud. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. Manhattan's East Village. This was the heart of Manhattan, where land was scarce and obscenely expensive. Before the Battle of New York, a single-family home like this one, with 6,000 square feet of living space, custom floor-to-ceiling windows, high-end construction, and a fully integrated Stark smart home system, would have been listed for around $20 million. So, $12 million was a steal. The moment Hawk said, "I'll take it," the real estate agent felt like her soul was about to leave her body. Gwen, who had been lost in a daydream of snowy days by the fireplace, was jolted back to reality. Her eyes went wide as she watched the agent take Hawk's bank card. Hawk's expression remained perfectly calm. It was just as he'd said before. After awakening his Cosmo, money was no longer a necessity. Lured by the promise of a massive commission, the agent promised Hawk she would have the deed transferred and the sale finalized within 3 hours. A moment later, she was peeling away in her Porsche, racing to the city records office. Hawk and Gwen turned and went back inside the house. And then, Gwen had him pinned against the wall. Hawk, his back pressed against the dry wall, blinked in surprise at Gwen, who had her hands braced on either side of his head, her eyes fixed on his. What's wrong? Hawk. Yeah. Gwen's face was serious. What exactly did you do in Quantico? Hearing this, Hawk laughed. I was wondering when you were going to ask. It had been 2 weeks since the Quantico incident. He had expected her to ask what had happened, but she never did, and he was not one to volunteer information. He assumed she never would. Gwen dropped her hands and shrugged. I wasn't going to. But now, it's obvious I have to. She knew Hawk had $1 million even before he went to Quantico. She knew exactly where it had come from. And with some effort, she could accept the $2 million donation to the church. But $12 million. She couldn't even wrap her head around it. Her father could work for the NYPD for 100 years and his salary and bonuses combined probably wouldn't add up to that much. Hawk didn't have this kind of money before he went to Quantico. He had it when he came back. He must have gotten it there. So, what the hell happened in Quantico? Gwen had no idea. The woman, Natasha, had never explained, only saying they had found Hawk. To be safe, Gwen hadn't pressed for details over the phone and had simply told Hawk to come home soon. By the time she reached the airfield at the address Natasha had given her, the woman was already gone, and she still had no idea what had happened. At first, Gwen hadn't worried about it. She had figured she'd see it on the news in a few days, so she'd kept a close eye on the headlines, especially any reports from the DC area. And the result? Business as usual. Everything was quiet on the home front. Not a single news story even mentioned Quantico. She'd figured it must have been some minor incident. But now here was Hawk, casually dropping $12 million like it was pocket change. Gwen stared at him, her eyes wide. What did you do that day? Why would they give you so much money? Hawk opened his mouth. Just as he was about to speak, Gwen raised an eyebrow, stopping him. She took a few steps back, her brow furrowed. Did you rob the base's treasury? Of course not. Hawk's denial was immediate. Even if I did, it would have been in cash. Do you think I could just deposit it into my bank account like this? I just blew up their treasury. That's all. Gwen nodded, accepting his logic. Then you. War reparations. What? They started the war. If they wanted it to end, they had to give me a way out. The money was the price they paid. Quote. Gwen drew in a sharp breath, staring at him in shock, a single phrase echoing in her mind. War reparations. How much did they pay you? 33 million. What? Gwen's voice cracked. That much? Is it? Hawk smiled. 1 million per person. 33 people. Honestly, I feel like I asked for too little. Hawk felt a brief pang of regret, but then let it go. What was he going to do with that much money anyway? 33 million, minus the 14 he'd spent today, still left him with 19. That was more than enough for him and Gwen to live on. That was all that mattered. Money was secondary. Power was what mattered. As long as he had his fist, he would always have money. Hawk looked at Gwen, who was still staring at him, her mouth slightly agape, and smiled. I should really thank Ross. Gwen snapped out of her shock, a suspicious look on her face. Why? If it wasn't for him, I never would have had the chance to get those war reparations. Business was business. Hawk was happy that Thaddeus Ross had given him the opportunity to make some money. But he was not happy about what Ross had done. So, Ross was dead, and his family cemetery was a crater. But there was no need to tell Gwen that part. She was too kind-hearted to hear about such things. Hawk smiled, changing the subject as he took her hand. Come on. Where are we going? The realtor was here before. I didn't get a good look. Let's go explore our new house. I like the walk-in closet in the master bedroom. You don't want to change anything. No. Gwen shook her head, glancing at him from the corner of her eye. She knew he was dodging the question. Gwen knew Hawk and the U.S. military. For them to pay out war reparations, something monumental must have happened at Quantico that day, so significant that the entire story was buried. She tightened her grip on his hand. Hawk felt the change in pressure and looked at her. What's wrong? Nothing. Gwen smiled, and her smile was so brilliant it seemed to light up the entire room. Some people laugh, and some people cry. Betty Ross was crying. It had been 10 days since her father, General Thaddeus Ross, had been buried, but in her DC townhouse, she was still weeping. One moment, she had been happy, having just gotten back together with her ex-boyfriend, Bruce Banner. Next, she was being told her father was dead. Decapitated. And to this day, she still didn't know the real cause of his death. All they would tell her was that it was a military accident. A military accident, my ass. Her father had been murdered, brutally and violently. Betty Ross wasn't stupid. She was a scientist. The second she saw her father's body, she knew exactly what had killed him. Someone had stomped his head into the ground. The question was, who? Since the funeral, Betty had been calling all of her father's old friends and colleagues. But they had all stonewalled her, insisting that his death was a military accident. Just as Betty was on the verge of losing her mind, one of them had sighed and said he would come and see her after work. In the living room, Betty stared at a picture of her father on her phone, making a silent vow. She would make her father's killer pay. No matter who it was. A blood debt for a father's murder can never be forgiven. Just then, the doorbell rang. Betty wiped her eyes, which were red and swollen from days of crying, and ran to the door. She opened it. Oh, Betty. Nick Fury stood in the doorway. He looked at her haggard face and red-rimmed eyes, and his voice was filled with genuine sympathy. You have to stay strong. This is what Ross would have wanted. Betty closed the door and looked at him. I will be, Mr. Fury. As soon as you tell me who killed my father. Nick Fury sighed. What happened at Quantico has been classified at the highest level. I know. Betty led him to the sofa and brought him a glass of lemonade. She sat down across from him, her jaw tight. No one at the Pentagon will tell me the truth. But I have a right to know, Mr. Fury. He was my father. Nick Fury shook his head with a pained expression, then looked around the empty living room. Is Bruce here? He went out to get some things. Betty said, assuming he was trying to change the subject. She looked at him expectantly. Mr. Fury, who is it? The killer is. Fury paused, a look of genuine conflict on his face. Seeing his hesitation, Betty didn't wait. She dropped to her knees in front of him. Please, Mr. Fury. You're the only one who will tell me the truth. Get up, Betty. Fury shot to his feet, trying to pull her up. But Betty wouldn't move. Her voice was choked with tears. Please, Mr. Fury. Tell me who killed my father. Quote. A series of emotions flickered across Nick Fury's dark face. The next second, he let out a long, heavy sigh. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. #bonus chapter every 300 ps. If you like the story, please leave a review. #add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators' thoughts. 3 comments 0 vote. 88 the one who chose to accept and the one who chose to refuse. Bonus. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. When Bruce Banner got home with the groceries, Nick Fury was already gone. Betty knelt on the living room carpet, her eyes vacant and staring at nothing. Seeing her like this, Bruce quickly closed the door, rushed to her side, and gently helped her up onto the sofa. Betty. Quote. She seemed to snap back to reality at his touch. Her eyes focused on him, and without a word, she lunged forward, crashing her lips against his. Bruce froze for a second, stunned by the sudden, almost savage intensity of her kiss. He then yielded, meeting her passion with his own. With a soft thud, their embrace sent them tumbling from the sofa onto the plush rug below. Clothes were torn away, piece by piece. Do you love me, Bruce? Of course. Really? I swear to God. Then you'll help me get my revenge, right? Of course Bruce's voice was thick with desire, his own eyes lost in hers. But then, as her words registered, the haze began to clear. Betty didn't give him a chance to react. My father is dead. Help me get revenge, Bruce. Okay, I will. Bruce was lost in the moment. A look of joy crossed Betty's face. She leaned over him, her arms wrapped around his neck, and whispered in his ear, her breath hot and ragged. Then become the Hulk again, my love. Quote. Hulk. The word struck him like a slap of cold reality. Bruce's mind cleared in an instant. He stared up at her, his eyes wide with disbelief. What did you say? Become the Hulk again. The Hulk is dead. But you're not. What? Bruce Banner was stunned. In the dim, shifting light of the living room, Betty's beautiful features seemed to twist. The man who killed my father is the same man who killed the Hulk. Don't you want revenge? Bruce Banner froze. Quote. The image of Hawk, standing before him in the snow-covered woods, flashed in his mind. Betty took a deep breath, her own eyes burning with a desperate intensity. Bruce, he killed my father. Nick Fury hadn't told her the killer's name. But before he left, he'd told her that the man who killed her father and the man who killed the Hulk were the same person. Betty had asked Bruce before who had killed the Hulk for him. But he had never told her who it was. She hadn't pressed the issue at the time. After all, with the Hulk gone, it was a good thing. It meant her father would have no more reason to stop her and Bruce from being together. But that was then. Now, Betty desperately wished that Bruce could still become the Hulk. It was the only way she could get her revenge. Betty looked at Bruce, her eyes filled with a desperate hope. Tell me, Bruce. You can still become the Hulk, can't you? Bruce met her gaze and said nothing. Betty's eyes lit up. Just as Gwen understood Hawk, Betty understood Bruce. His silence didn't mean no. It meant there was a way. A thrill went through her. She leaned in, holding him tightly, her voice a desperate plea. Bruce, please. Bruce felt her on top of him, felt her tears and the strength in her grip. He bit his lip, shook his head, and said one word. Sorry. Hearing his answer, Betty's body went rigid. With a sharp movement, she sat up, staring at him with her red-rimmed eyes, her expression one of pure disbelief. Bruce. Betty. Bruce quickly got to his feet. He looked down at Betty, who had slumped back onto the rug, and gave her a pained smile. The Hulk is dead. He had come to terms with it. Losing the Hulk had its pros and cons, but overall, it was for the best. He could finally live a normal life. And that was a good thing. Bruce had never been a wild person. He was a scientist. As a normal man, he could find a job in a lab, earn a good salary, and continue his research. He had already lined up his next gig. Stark Industries had a gamma lab in Jersey City. Tony, who was about to undergo his own medical procedure, had already given him his blessing to use it. Theoretically, another dose of gamma radiation could trigger the transformation again. That was why he had been silent when Betty had asked. But he didn't want to. He had finally gotten his normal life back. Betty. Bruce knelt, placing his hands on his girlfriend's shoulders, his gaze fixed on her tear-filled eyes. His voice was heavy. Yes, there might be a way for me to become the Hulk again. But I don't know if it would even work. The Hulk is dead. He was the product of an accident. Maybe it would work, or maybe it would just kill me. If you really want me to try, just say the word. I'll do it. Their eyes met. Betty looked at her boyfriend's unwavering determination, at the devastating promise that he'd walk through hell if she asked him to. That's when she finally cracked. With a broken sob, she collapsed into his arms, her body shaking with raw grief and despair. Bruce said nothing. He just held her tightly. After a long while, Betty's crying subsided, though her eyes were even more red and swollen than before. But she seemed to have calmed down. She took a tissue from Bruce, and as she dabbed at her tears, her voice was quiet. How did my father die? Bruce hesitated, then told her everything. He had been there when she got the news. He had gone with her to DC, had held her when she collapsed, had been the one to call Nick Fury and get the full story. It was the same as what had happened to him. Except Hawk was far more ruthless. His revenge had been swift. In a single day, he had gone to New Mexico, then to Quantico, and had killed Ross when he'd tried to have him captured. When Bruce had heard the story, he had felt a secret satisfaction. After all, he had been on the receiving end of it himself. General Ross had chased him so relentlessly that he'd had to hide in India. So, to hear that Ross had been killed while trying to hunt someone else, he couldn't help but feel a little pleased. After listening to Bruce's story, Betty had no extreme reaction. Her voice was calm. Who is he? Betty. Bruce frowned, shaking his head. No weapon in the world can hurt him. And besides, this was Ross, just let it go. He had been about to say that Ross had brought this on himself. But he caught himself. The dead deserve at least that much respect. Even the military has conceded. I know. But the military knows who he is. And you know who he is. Betty's voice was still quiet as she looked up at him. I just need to know who killed my father. Don't worry, Bruce. I'm not going to do anything stupid. There's nothing I can do anyway. Bruce looked at her sad, pleading face, and after a moment, he sighed. Hawk. Hawk. What's his last name? I only know him as Hawk. Bruce shook his head. He killed the Hulk because his sister was killed during the Hulk's fight with the Abomination. So before Christmas, he found me, killed the Hulk, and spared my life. If your father hadn't tried to go after him, Bruce stopped himself again. But the meaning was clear. Even the military was trying to bury the whole thing. Was that just because Hawk was powerful? No. The real reason was that Hawk had been in the right. When the US military's force is not enough to crush an enemy, the military becomes remarkably reasonable. Betty looked at Bruce, who had once again cut himself off, and smiled faintly. Don't worry, Bruce. I really did just want to know his name. All right. Bruce sighed. He looked at Betty, who seemed a little less strained now that she had the name. Are you okay? Betty smiled again and stood up. I'm tired, Bruce. Okay. He stood up as well. Let's get you to bed. She shook her head. I think I'd like to sleep alone tonight. If that's okay. Bruce didn't question it. He just nodded. Then I'll walk you to your room. Okay. Betty didn't refuse. After Bruce walked her upstairs to her bedroom, he lingered in the doorway, about to speak. But she'd already turned onto her side, facing away from him. He shook his head, switched off the light, and quietly pulled the door shut. Lying on the bed, Betty heard the door click shut. Her eyes, which had been closed, snapped open. Her pupils, calm just moments before, now blazed with fury. Hawk. From New York. Just wait. I will avenge you, Dad. I swear it. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. Bonus chapter every 300 ps. If you like the story, please leave a review. Add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators' thoughts. 5 comments 0 vote. 89 Phoenix is master, Draco is guardian. Bonus. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. Manhattan. The East Village. A yellow Corolla drove slowly down the street, turning into the driveway of the Orange Hood, single-family home that had changed hands a month ago, and heading up toward the garage. As Gwen pulled up, the garage door opened automatically. She drove inside, parking next to a black Audi A8 that gleamed under the lights. The Audi was Hawk's. He'd bought it shortly after they moved in. Since then, Gwen's little yellow car mostly stayed parked during the week. Call it old-fashioned pride, but Hawk was determined not to mooch rides anymore, while Gwen couldn't care less. By now, the passenger seat of that Audi A8 had practically molded itself to her body. Gwen got out, opened the trunk of her Corolla, and lifted out a few grocery bags from a stop she'd made on the way home. She walked toward the door that led from the garage into the living room. The moment she opened it, she heard it, the rhythmic, impactful sound of punches coming from the backyard. She glanced out the living room window. Of course. He was training again. Gwen smiled, set her keys and groceries on the kitchen island, then shoved her hands into her wool coat pockets. As she walked through the living room, she snagged a towel from the coffee table and headed for the back door. In the backyard, a heavy bag hanging from a sturdy tree branch was taking a brutal beating, ready to split open from Hawk's relentless assault. Hawk was barricaded. As he threw his punches, his blood boiled, and a column of steam rose from his body like a signal fire. Gwen stepped outside but didn't say a word. She leaned against the railing of the back porch, a small smile on her face as she admired the masterpiece in motion before her. A little while later, Hawk threw his 10,000th punch of the day. Boom. The heavy bag stopped dead in midswing, then with a quiet ripping sound, the bottom tore open and sand spilled out onto the ground. Leaning against the railing, Gwen raised an eyebrow. Is that the 10th one this month? Or the 11th? 11th. Hawk glanced at the ruined bag, then turned and walked toward her. Gwen smiled and tossed him the towel. Go take a shower. I'll handle breakfast. My mom taught me a new recipe yesterday. All right. Hawk caught the towel. He watched as Gwen turned and walked back inside, then began wiping the non-existent sweat from his brow as he followed her into the living room. Gwen carried the groceries into the kitchen. Hawk headed up the stairs to the master bedroom on the 3rd floor. In the bathroom, steam from the hot shower swirled around Hawk, mixing with the heat radiating from his skin until he seemed surrounded by mist. Within that mist, ghostly images flickered, a green dragon and a fiery phoenix dancing in the vapor. Hawk closed his eyes, his consciousness diving deep into his cosmos as he gazed up at his inner universe. Where once there had been only the constellation of the phoenix, there was now a second. They seemed to split his inner cosmos between them, the newly awakened Draco and the ancient phoenix ruling their separate domains, standing back to back like sentinels, each protecting the other. His second constellation, Draco, was now fully ignited. He'd actually traced the dragon's outline back at Calvary Cemetery. But he'd only truly awakened it 5 days ago. After returning from Quantico, the timing had felt right. He postponed his trip to Africa, deciding to focus on awakening Draco first. You have to sharpen your tools before you can do the job properly. And awakening Draco 5 days ago had been the right call. Cosmo is the foundation of every saint's power. The stronger the Cosmo, the stronger the saint. With Draco's awakening, his own Cosmo had grown significantly stronger. This wasn't just a feeling, it was real, measurable power. The moment Draco ignited, Hawk had felt his Cosmo expand at an almost visible rate. Where it had once been just large enough for the Phoenix alone, it could now comfortably hold both constellations with space left over. The Phoenix remained the stronger of the two, it had been his first, after all. But he had now gained access to the dragon's fundamental power. The might of the dragon, and the dragon's guard. But that wasn't the greatest reward. The greatest reward was that, after igniting Draco, the sixth sense he had been chasing for so long was finally within his grasp. He could actually see the door now. Before, he hadn't even known it existed. Now everything had changed. The door was right there, and the path forward was crystal clear. All he had to do was follow it, and eventually he'd be able to reach that gate, push it open, and unlock the sixth sense, taking his Cosmo to a completely different level. For the past few days, Hawk had been splitting his time between researching Wakanda online and trying to take another step toward the sixth sense before he left. But the sixth sense remained just out of reach. As for Wakanda, he was done waiting for summer. He would ask his counselor for a leave of absence and head to Africa as soon as possible. He already had his acceptance letter to NYU for the fall. His last semester of high school was largely a formality. His classmates were doing the same thing. Apart from the ones still scrambling to get into other schools, most students who'd already gotten accepted were gradually disappearing from campus. Some were working to save up for college expenses. Others had been invited for campus visits at their future schools. And some just didn't see the point of showing up anymore and wanted to chill out. Midtown didn't mind. As long as you had the credits, you could skip the entire semester and still graduate. Just don't miss the ceremony in June. Or the prom. A little while later, Hawk finished his shower, changed into an outfit Gwen had picked out for him on a shopping trip last weekend, and went downstairs. Gwen had already prepared breakfast. Hawk's eyes lit up as he saw the food on the dining table. Wow. What do you think? Gwen smiled, waiting for his review. Hawk looked at her, his expression dead serious. Honestly, I don't know what I'd do without you. Then you better not lose me. Gwen, who was sorting through a stack of recipe cards she'd borrowed from her mom, replied just as seriously, then broke into a smile. Come on, dig in. Hawk sat down at the table. Gwen sat across from him, copying the cards onto new ones as he ate. Many family recipes were often passed down on cards like these. The ones she was holding belonged to her mother, Helen, and would need to go back eventually. But she could copy them for herself to keep here, and someday pass them down to her own daughter. By the way, Hawk said. You're heading to Berkeley next week, right? Gwen, still writing, nodded. Yeah, for 2 months. I'll be back at the end of May. The university had invited her for a 2-month campus visit. Hawk confirmed the dates and nodded, saying nothing more. Perfect. Next week, Gwen goes to Berkeley. And he would be visiting Wakanda. Soon, they finished eating and cleared the table quickly, then headed outside to begin the day's work. Mowing the lawn. Believe it or not, in America, you can actually get fined if you don't keep your grass cut regularly. Same goes for hanging laundry outside to dry. Some states are even worse, they'll fine you for growing vegetables in your own yard. As Hawk wheeled it out, he watched Gwen inspect the machine with practiced ease, and he couldn't help but say it again. Seriously, what would I do without you? Gwen looked up at him, her expression just as serious as before. Again, you'd better not lose me. With that, she gave the starter cord a sharp yank. The engine roared to life. Though Gwen had grown up in an apartment, her grandfather was a farmer from the south. When it came to machinery, she knew her way around. And so, with Gwen calling out directions, Hawk pushed the mower across their front yard. The noise brought some neighbors outside. A few went back in, but others, seeing what they were doing, decided to drag out their own mowers. It was Saturday, after all, they didn't have anything better to do. Soon, the sound of multiple lawnmowers filled the air throughout the district. By the time Hawk had finished mowing, it was 11 o'clock. With their work done, Gwen got ready to leave. She was meeting Mary Jane for some shopping this afternoon. Hawk watched as she backed her car out of the garage and smiled. I'll come get you later. Gwen nodded, then drove down the street. Hawk watched her go. Just as he was turning to clean the lawnmower. Suddenly, the door to his sixth sense shuddered violently. In the next instant, a surge of power erupted from within him. He spun around, his eyes snapping toward the direction Gwen had just gone. Bonus chapter at 200 PS. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. #bonus chapter every 300 PS. If you like the story, please leave a review. #add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators' thoughts. 10 comments 0 vote. 90 Gwen, who likes to drink hot chocolate bonus. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. Gwen, where are you? I just left Hawk's place. Ooh. Don't get any ideas. City Hall sent him a notice to mow his lawn or face a fine. He didn't know how, so I went over this morning to teach him. Gwen, having just left the East Village, was on the phone with Mary Jane, whom she was supposed to meet for an afternoon of shopping. Mary Jane laughed. Our neighborhood has a landscaping service. You're telling me a place as fancy as the East Village doesn't? They do. He just doesn't want to pay for it. Why not? Save where you can, spend where you must. Gwen recited Hawk's philosophy. Mary Jane was stunned for a moment. But then she remembered. Hawk from high school, the guy with only 3 outfits, who communicated mostly through grunts, who got around on his own 2 feet, who lived like a monk, and she had to admit, it sounded exactly like something he'd say. But discussing Hawk's ability to buy a mansion but not hire a gardener wasn't the point of the call. Mary Jane got back on topic. So when are you getting here? Should I grab us a table at Madame Noyle? Gwen's face lit up. Yes. I'm on my way. I'll be there in about half an hour. She loved hot chocolate. And the hot chocolate at Madame Noyle's patisserie was, in Gwen's expert opinion, the best in all of Queens. No, in all of New York City. Soon, Gwen hung up the phone. The thought of that hot chocolate made her foot press down on the accelerator. Her yellow Corolla picked up speed and headed toward Queens. Behind her, a nondescript Toyota sedan matched her acceleration. Think she noticed us? No way. It's a straight road. Then why'd she speed up? Who cares? Stick to the plan. Once we're over the bridge and in Queens, we find a spot and box her in. Remember, the client wants her alive. $1 million for a live target, $500,000 for a dead one. Don't fuck this up. Got it. Got it. The 2 men in the back of the Toyota nodded, their eyes fixed greedily on the yellow Corolla ahead. The confirmations hadn't come from them. They had come from a walkie-talkie held by a bearded man in the passenger seat. Clearly, this wasn't their only car. There were 3. Sure enough, as Gwen's Corolla approached the entrance to the Manhattan Bridge, 2 more nondescript Toyota sedans appeared, pulling up on either side of her. Once they were on the bridge, the 3 cars, moving with the flow of traffic, shifted positions, forming a perfect pincer formation around her yellow Corolla. A little while later, Gwen came off the bridge and turned onto the road that led to Mary Jane's house. The Toyota to her left suddenly swerved into her lane. As if misjudging the distance, it bumped into the side of her car with a loud thud. Gwen jumped, slamming on the brakes. The other car pulled over too. A middle-aged woman got out of the car, an apologetic look on her face. Gwen opened her door and got out. She looked at the dent and sighed. Just as she was about to get her phone to call and tell Mary Jane she would be late, the woman called out to her, insisting the accident was entirely her fault. She suggested they pull over to a side street so they wouldn't block traffic while she called her insurance company. Gwen was a bit thrown by how fast it all went down, but since the lady was being so cooperative about taking the blame, she went along with it. No police meant no paperwork and no waiting around. Soon, Gwen followed the woman's car into a quiet side street. But the moment she was about to put her car in park, the screech of tires echoed behind her. Another Toyota had shot into the alley, blocking her exit. What the shit? Gwen froze, a terrible feeling washing over her. Robbery or kidnapping? Her mind was racing, but her instincts took over. She hit the door lock button. Just as she was reaching for her phone to call 911. Crash. Another massive impact. Gwen cried out in shock. The 4 men in cartoon masks who had just gotten out of the car behind her were just as startled. They all spun around. A black Audi A8, so new it still gleamed in the sun, had slammed into the back of their Toyota. Suddenly, the driver's side door opened, and Hawk, wearing a fitted black t-shirt, stepped out. The 4 masked men exchanged a look, then all raised their handguns and aimed them at him. Fuck you. Die. Bang, 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 bang. 4 bullets tore through the air, striking Hawk in the face, chest, and right arm. And then, nothing. With 4 metallic pings, the flattened slugs clattered harmlessly to the ground. Hawk glanced down at the bullets at his feet. The next second, he vanished, reappearing in front of one of the masked men. His right hand shot out, paused for an imperceptible moment, then his left hand joined it. He gripped the man's head and twisted. Crack. The sound of the man's neck snapping was sickeningly loud in the quiet alley. Another masked man recovered from his shock. Ah. Crack. He met the same fate as his partner. The other two were no different. From the moment Hawk had stepped out of his car to the moment the four masked men lay on the ground with their heads twisted at impossible angles, less than 3 seconds had passed. By the time Gwen had processed what was happening, Hawk was already at the front of the alley. The engine of the first Toyota was screaming, the rear wheels spinning uselessly against the pavement, kicking up clouds of acrid smoke, but the car didn't move. Hawk had the rear of the car in a one-handed grip, his 4 fingers sunk into the trunk as if it were tofu. The muscles in his arm weren't even tensed, but he held the car firmly in place. Shit. Come on. The woman in the driver's seat was screaming, her foot jammed on the accelerator. Hawk raised an eyebrow, then let go. The next second. Boom. Like a drag racer off the line, the Toyota shot forward, slamming head-on into a wall. The airbag deployed instantly, knocking the woman unconscious. The moment he had released the car, Hawk had turned and walked back to Gwen's Corolla. He tapped on the window. Inside, Gwen was still gripping her phone. She looked up with a dazed expression and numbly rolled down the window. Hey, Gwen, are you here? I ordered your favorite hot chocolate for you. Mary Jane's voice came from the phone in Gwen's hand. But Gwen didn't seem to hear it. She just stared at Hawk. The last time Hawk had fought the Hulk, most of the battle had been underwater. By the time he had resurfaced, it was already over. But this time, she had seen the whole thing. Her mind was still replaying the image of Hawk's ice-cold face, of the bullets flattening against his skin, of him appearing before the 4 men and snapping their necks. Crack, 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 and of him holding a speeding car in place with one hand. Gwen was in shock. Hawk was not. He looked at her dazed expression, smiled, and took the phone from her hand. Hey, Mary Jane. Hawk. Gwen's a little tied up. Can you get that hot chocolate to go? Wah. Hawk hung up, then a thought seemed to occur to him. He looked at Gwen. So, hot chocolate. I thought you said you didn't like it. Gwen snapped back to reality. Hawk. Yeah. Hawk smiled. The police captain's daughter is letting her guard down. Or was it the thought of hot chocolate that did it? Gwen's cheeks flushed. She didn't answer, just scrambled out of the car. There was another car. What? There were 3 of them. 3 Toyotas. There are only 2 here. Gwen's mind replayed the scene on the bridge. She remembered the 3 cars, one on her left, one on her right, one behind her. There were 3 Toyotas following me. She would absolutely not admit that her guard had been down because she was thinking about dessert. Gwen's expression was serious. And I don't like hot chocolate. I'm 18 now. Hawk just smiled. But I heard Helen say that when you were little, your biggest dream was to live in a house made of chocolate. Shut up. Gwen's eye twitched. She quickly cut him off, changing the subject back to the 3rd car. There was a 3rd car. They got away, Hawk said with a small smile. He saw her worried look and added, don't worry. They won't get far. Gwen blinked. As she was trying to figure out what he meant by, they got away, but they won't get far, the sound of sirens echoed in the distance, growing closer. Wee-woo, wee-woo. Thump, thump. NYPD. Hands in the air. Do it now. Quote. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links.